Chapter 106, Crude. Chapter 106. Crude. Shen Zichuan was unable to bring 2 million this trip, but he brought sincerity. Lei Changming looked at those few chests of silvers. They were all genuine stuff, stacked neatly in order. He grabbed a handful at random to get a feel of that heavy weight and said, "These few chests of silver are something that even the brothers under my command selling sugared biscuits can produce. Aren't you looking down on me a tad too much? The chief might not necessarily dare to accept it if I had really brought over 2 million. Shen Zichuan had already taken his seat. He said, "Good deals are worth discussing over slowly. The ones who should be anxious at present are Tizhou and Shaoqi." Lei Changming waved a hand to get his men to drag Kong Ling out of the tent, leaving only his own guards and Shen Zichuan behind. From start to end, he remained unwilling to leave his seat. Without taking even half a step closer to Shen Zichuan, he said, "You and Shaoqi broke out of the siege in Kudu. You could be considered sworn friends who have been through life and death. So why did you fall out with him suddenly and come to beg me instead? Since the chief knows of me, then you must have also known that Shen Wei is my old man. Shen Wei let the enemies into Dunzhou and caused a long-standing grudge to form between me and Li Bei. Shao Qie and I may be able to bury the hatchet, but Shao Jiming may not necessarily be willing to use me." Shen Zichuan looked troubled. A man's aspiration is to make a name for himself. Shao Qie is like a clay Buddha crossing the river who can't even save himself. So how would he have the energy to carve out a path for me? There is some misunderstanding between me and His Excellency Han, but those are all minor issues that do not warrant the death penalty. As long as someone can vouch for me, I'll be able to return to Kudu to serve the imperial court again. So that means you still want to be an official, huh? With both hands on his knees, Lei Changming said, "Brother, to tell you the truth, I want to be an official too. We used to hang out in the mountains and wilderness back then, and we lived pretty much a carefree life. But when all is said and done, it's not a proper job. Every single one of our movements will come under close scrutiny by the Qidong garrison troop. The chief and I have a common goal." Shen Zichuan lifted his little bamboo fan slightly. "Isn't this just perfect? But I've been deceived by scholars like you until it scares me now." Lei Changming put on a look of dread. "This 2 million of yours are still in Tizhou. How are you going to get it to me? And that Han Jin too. How are you going to help me save him? Make yourself clear today so I know how things stand. Only then can I truly take you under me. The silver is not an issue. The chief can pick a trusted man to go to Tizhou and ask Zhou Gui for the money. He knows where the silvers are kept. As long as you can move it, you can take the money away now. You think he would be willing to give me if I ask him for it?" Lei Changming rubbed his fingers together, as if he still wanted to touch those silvers. "You have Kong Ling in your hands. That's Zhou Gui's trusted aide," Shen Zichuan said with a smile. "You have 40,000 soldiers and horses too. How would Zhou Gui not dare to give you? He always wanted to be a good official who loves his people like his children. He won't infuriate you at this critical juncture." Lei Changming looked at Shen Zichuan as if he was getting a measure of him. The tent quietened down. It was all Lei Changming's guards to Shen Zichuan's left and right. He touched the teacup but did not drink up. In this long standoff, Lei Changming suddenly laughed and said, "I have ample reserve supplies. I'm not in a hurry to ask for money. It doesn't matter if this 2 million is left there for a few more days. Men, serve tea to young Master Shen. Our top priority is to discuss how to save Han Jin. After all, our meeting of Han Qing in Kudu hinges on him." Kong Ling was locked up in a stable. He lay across the weeds and panted heavily, securely bound by coarse hemp rope. The horse that was resting before him stuck out its hoof and discharged steaming hot dung. That stench made Kong Ling dizzy, and he tried to turn his head away to gasp for breath. The band of bandits surrounding him outside the stable roared with laughter. Kong Ling shouted indignantly, "The traitor deceived me! Bah! A gentleman would rather die than be humiliated. Don't even dream of using me to threaten Tszio. Horsewhips jabbed at Kong Ling's face. He was covered with mud and horse dung all over, and being watched by these people all around him caused waves of giddiness to wash over him. He said with shame and hatred, "You people are in cahoots. You, Lei Changming. What good end will you come to by conspiring with such an unrighteous person?" But no matter how Kong Ling cursed and cussed, there were only roars of laughter all around him. He was a well-read and well-educated man. Whether it was Tantai Long or Zhou Gui in the past, they all treated him with courtesy. Who would not respectfully address him as Mr. Qingfeng everywhere he went. But now, not only was he tied up in a stable, he was even ridiculed and laughed at by these people. He thought again of the snowy night when he fled Dunzhou. The face of these bandits gradually overlapped with the faces of the Biancha cavalry, with vague sounds of laughter everywhere. Unable to restrain his emotions for a moment, Kong Ling started to choke with sobs. "Patrol guards!" An officer suddenly walked out from the other end and bellowed, "What are all of you gathering here for? Is this old fart more important than the task of patrolling the camp? If the patrol is delayed, I'll see how all of you will get skinned. Move it, disperse." The surrounding people broke up noisily. Kong Ling shifted over to the edge of the stable and put his head against the railing to let the dripping rainwater wash away the filth. He took deep breaths, as if he was breathing in fresh air. His goatee was so dirty that it had become a cake of mud. People went in and out of the tent in the distance. When they lifted the flap of the tent, he could see Lei Changming preparing to host a feast to entertain Shinzichuan. Kong Ling spat and closed his eyes in the rain. An unspecified amount of time later, someone gave Kong Ling's cheeks a light pat. Kong Ling opened his eyes. It was the man he had seen earlier. This person seemed to be in his early 30s. His face was dark, and he had an air of toughness to him. He called out, "Mr. Qingfeng." Kong Ling was alarmed. "Don't be afraid. I'm Tantai Long's old subordinate. I used to hold a post in the Dunzhou garrison troop. I've met you once." This man forced a smile, then sighed and said, "Mr. really ought not to have ended up in such a state. Since you are Tantai Long's former subordinate, how can you follow a bandit like Lei Changming to stage a rebellion?" Kong Ling said woodenly. "Tantai Long hated these villains the most when he was still alive. I was driven into a corner," this man said with a bitter smile. "After Dunzhou was recovered, the imperial court transferred the grains away and used it to fill up Jueshi's deficit. Those of us who survived were so starved that we had to chew tree barks. Although the chief is a bandit, he is righteous and generous. It's only by following him we can have enough food to fill our stomach. We have no choice." Kong Ling knew he was telling the truth, but words failed him, and he could only remain silent. This man helped Kong Ling up and said, "I heard the intent of the chief earlier at the table. He's prepared to use you to negotiate with the prefectural prefect of Tszhou. I was worried that you would be too strong-willed and could not bear the humiliation. So I found a chance to step out. Mister, I'll take you away on horseback right now." Kong Ling looked at his sincere expression and said, "If you let me go, Lei Changming will definitely not let you off lightly." This man untied Kong Ling's ropes and quickly said, "I'll send you to Tszhou and come back to apologize. I was originally a loyal and righteous soldier under General Tantai's command. But now I've been reduced to a bandit just so I have food to fill my stomach. I can't live with myself deep down. But the chief has been kind to me, so I can't turn my back on him either. Mister, let me help you up the horse." After being helped up the horse, Kong Ling held his arm and choked with sobs. "You are a sensible man." The man got onto the horse too and draped a cloak over Kong Ling. With a shake of the reins, he led Kong Ling around to the main gate of the camp. There were still people patrolling in the rain. On seeing him, they all paid their obeisances to him. Without saying a word more, he flashed his token and brought Kong Ling out of the camp. Both men had been galloping for only a moment when they heard the sound of berating behind them. It was soldiers in pursuit of them. This place is still 1,000 li one away from Tsizhou. Mr. The man braved the rain to guide the way. We'll run without a break all night. Kong Ling swayed from the jolts and bumps. He clutched the reins tightly and followed swiftly after the man. The sound of pursuit behind him never stopped. Branches in the dark night lashed at his face. Kong Ling did not even dare to look back. He endured the pain, determined to hurry back to Tsizhou and waste no time in tipping off Zhou Gui. Shun Zichuan ate very little. He ignored the singing and dancing in the tent and sat down at the lower area to drink wine. Lei Changming had brought along quite a number of concubines with his troops in their march forward. Many of them were women he had grabbed in broad daylight back in Duanzhou. He told one of them to go over and pour wine for Shun Zichuan, then urged him with great gusto as he sat on his seat. "Brother Shun, drink up. I bought plenty of excellent wine this trip. Drink as much as you want tonight." Shun Zichuan saw that Lei Changming had drunk until he was flushed in the face. His voice was growing increasingly loud, and he did not hold back as he teased the others. The woman in his arms had been pinched until her neck and shoulders were covered in bruises. Shun Zichuan raised the cup slightly and downed the wine without saying a word. Lei Changming said as he ate the meat, "You're the son of the Prince of Jianxing, Xin Wei. You never had to endure hardships since you were young, so you don't know how valuable grains are. But you sure have the candor of someone from the marital fraternity by giving this 2 million at the mere drop of a hat. Brother Shin, not that I'm bragging, but I think you did well by throwing in your lot with me now. That Xiao Jie is just a brat. He could still be of some use in Kudu, but now that he's returning to Libei, what available path is there for him? He still has 20,000 soldiers with him. The Libei armored cavalry will definitely not take them in. Don't tell me the Prince of Libei can still make him the commander-in-chief of Libei? That Xiao Jiming is the one who's truly formidable." Not letting those women touch his wine jar, Shun Zichuan poured himself a cup of wine and said with a smile, "Yeah." Lei Changming gobbled down the pork shoulder and wiped his mouth before he said, "Speaking of these generals, I'm only afraid of Qidong's commander-in-chief, Qi Juin. Of the 4 great generals of the world, she's the only woman. I saw her once when I worked as an armed escort in Hezhou. What the fuck? Such a pretty lass, and yet the weapon she wields is an executioner's blade. An executioner's blade. Too, the blade Xiao Qie uses is also an executioner's blade, isn't it? One straight slash, and it can cleave apart bones and flesh. What it relies on is real physical strength. It's also to do her a favor that I came to Tsizhou this time. I'll capture Xiao Jie on her behalf and send him back to Kudu. This will allow their Qidong to break with Libei without being directly involved. Say, with such a merit like this, will I be able to get a position as a general under her command? I heard that Commander-in-Chief Qi has 5 great generals under her command. Each of them is skilled in combat, and they are all men she single-handedly trained all these years over at the Qidong garrison troops." Shun Zichuan said, "If you really go over, you'll naturally come up top and be the big brother of them all." Lei Changming boomed with laughter. He scooped up the woman in his arms and kissed her haphazardly in spite of the cries. He wiped his greasy hands clean on those silk fabrics and said, "It is from the mountains that I made my mark. I've been running all over all these years, and I've also fought some battles. Mention me, Lei Changming, in Zhongbua, and who doesn't know that I can fight? Brother Shin, you know Lu Guangbai of the Bianjuan Commandery, right? Their Lu clan is poor as heck. He gives one the impression of being an unyielding man, and it's all by virtue of his vigor that he could keep up the desperate fights at Bianjuan. He doesn't have any other capabilities. In my opinion, Lu Guangbai is the most incompetent one among the 4 great generals. He's called, what do you call it, the fire beacon amidst blowing sand or something. Bianjuan lights up the beacon towers every year, so what's so special about this? Might as well vacate his post and let me take over instead. I guarantee I'll be way better than him. Seeing that he was drunk and starting to boast, Shun Zichuan lowered his fingers and gently righted the chopsticks on the table. He said with a smile, "He's indeed not very impressive. Men like Commander Zhuo are the real heroes." Lei Changming poured wine into his mouth, which leaked over half of his body. Too late to wipe it, he tossed the wine cup away and said to Shun Zichuan, "He who took down the enemy's heads from 1,000 li away, and he who struck fear in enemies' hearts with one arrow." He was all the storyteller in the tea-house in Huzhou spoke of in the past. Said he killed his wife to protect the city, and consequently, his hair rapidly turned white. Oh man, one can't help but shed tears to hear his story. A pity there was no avoiding the disillusionment of a hero, and he still ended up retiring early. Otherwise, he and I might even get to be sworn brothers. It was pandemonium in the tent, as if a host of demons were dancing and running wild within. Those so-called guards, deputy generals, all showed their true colors as they stood or lay down and pulled the prostitutes over to drink and make merry. Such an army like this has no military discipline to speak of. They were the same as Lei Changming, bandits who depended on weapons at the very beginning to plunder and loot. Sitting among them, Shun Zichuan had a subtle sense that something was off. Lei Changming should not be such a man. If he was this kind of short-sighted man who enjoyed life while he could, then how could he have stood out from among the crowd of bandits? What this man had on display was completely different from what Shun Zichuan had heard of him from rumors. Lei Changming got up to chase after the prostitute and pulled her into his arms to fondle and grope. He drank the wine, sang some obscure farm song from Dengzhou, and danced and gesticulated with merriment like a bull that had rashly crashed its way onto the chessboard. He enjoyed himself to his heart's content, and drank himself drunk. But unexpectedly, he smacked his forehead and said as he pointed at Shun Zichuan, "Your mother is a dancer from Duanzhou. Brother Shun, quick, get up and dance for us." Chapter 107, Odd. Chapter 107, Odd. The sound of rain outside the tent grew softer, and the tent flap was opened, dissipating the heat within. Lecherous howls of the drunk men rang out from the camp in the deep of the night, while soldiers with arms around one another played guessing games. Lei Changming was so hot that he undid his clothes and laid his chest bare. His chest was tanned, with plenty of scars and a tuft of chest hair that grew unchecked like weed beneath his clothes. Drunkenly embracing the woman in his arms, he sang and danced, and even called out to Shun Zichuan, "Brother Shun, get up!" At this point in time, the flap moved, and several servile and submissive soldiers entered to place down the food. Shun Zichuan partially opened the little bamboo fan and stood up. The candle flames in the tent were not bright enough. He raised his hand to block the side of his face at an angle with the fan, then looked at Lei Changming and said softly, "What dance does the chief want to see?" Lei Changming felt that Shun Zichuan was really good-looking. He was not only astonishingly beautiful when seen this way, but also so gorgeous that he overshadowed and outshone everything else in the room. Lei Changming drank the wine to embolden himself, then shoved the woman away and pounced on Shun Zichuan. He did not expect to trip over the wine jar at his feet and cut a sorry sight as he fell at Shun Zichuan's feet. It was in this way Lei Changming sprawled on the ground and gasped for breath that reeked of wine. He wanted to grab the hem of Shun Zichuan's robe, but he grasped at nothing but empty air. He let loose a chuckle and began to laugh. "Smell nice." Lei Changming stretched his neck out and sniffed the air hard. "You really smell so good. Brother Shun, come on. Help me up. I'll dance with you. Dance whatever you like." Damn, so this is what others mean by the fragrance of a beauty. Shun Zichuan looked askance at him, and watched him crawl on the ground like a pot-bellied hairy spider as he chased after the corner of Shun Zichuan's plain, white clothes. For some reason, Shun Zichuan felt an extremely sudden wave of abhorrence wash over him in this absurdly comical moment. His hatred, which had broken free of its dam, was just like magma, so scalding that his fingers, which had been gripping the fan, went white. His teacher told him to leave Kudu and return to Zhongbua. Yet the Duanzhou, which he once pined for, was successively handed over to men like these. Lei Changming and the others were just like personification of malice. They were the evil ghosts who had taken over the state. Shen Zichuan lightly rested his bamboo fan at the side of his lip. He let out a smile and slowly took a step back. In the din under the flickers of ghostly shadows, he bent over slightly and said, "Come over." Lei Changming originally wanted to climb to his feet, but now it seemed like he could not care less as he crawled on his hands and knees towards Shen Zichuan. In his trance, he felt that what he was seeing was not a human being, but an untouchable, nocturnal demon. He salivated and swallowed his saliva before he realized that Shen Zichuan had a tiny white jade stone on his right ear. Someone had carefully polished that jade into a perfect sphere, and it looked exceedingly gentle on Shen Zichuan's earlobe under the glow of the light. It was the only accessory he had on his entire body, other than his bamboo fan. "Brother Shen," Lei Changming said with urgency. "Quick, help me up." The soldiers set down the plates with their heads lowered. Then, with trays in hands, they stepped aside as if they were preparing to leave. The shouts and laughter of the men and women were like the drizzle which, in Lei Changming's ears, became another seemingly elusive world. He seemed to be a drooling jackal that had been chained and pulled towards Shen Zichuan by an invisible force. The tent was all upside down. Lei Changming felt a little dizzy from drinking too much. "Brother Shen," Lei Changming chanted as though he was paying religious homage. "Shen Zichuan. Beauty. Brother Shen." Lei Changming haphazardly tore away at his own opened clothes, feeling as if the scars on his chest were burning. He had never been like this before. His eyes were clearly opened, yet he seemed to be asleep. He was still crawling. It seemed as if he had finally gotten near to Shen Zichuan's feet. He tilted his head up and let out a vague laugh as he tried to tug at the hem of Shen Zichuan's white-as-clouds robe. "What a temptress!" Lei Changming reached out a shivering hand and murmured ingratiatingly at Shen Zichuan. "How ravishing can you be?" Lei Changming killed people like flies in Zhongbua, grabbed countless women, and coerced many children. He was the kind of person who seemed to love beautiful and exquisite people by nature. He wanted to tear all those who were delicate, untainted, and even ignorant into bloodied, tainted masses. He committed much evil, and he even thought that ghosts would all take a detour on seeing him. He did not fear karma at all. They had done wrong, and yet they were still able to sleep well with dreams of limitless wealth and glory. They would not think back of all those bodies they had trampled into pieces. All those were like the clouds, people they once could not touch. Lei Changming's vision was somewhat blurred. Shen Zichuan's face gradually became more and more vague. On the contrary, that round little jade stone increased in clarity until it turned into a little jade stone that he seemed to have seen before. Little Buddy. Lei Changming once hoodwinked a child in this way. He pinned down the other party's limbs, and violated the other party in the pitch-dark tent. He still remembered drinking that day too. The scars on his chest were burning like this too. Those hands and legs he was gripping were so thin and slender that Lei Changming even had the thought to break them in his stimulated state. He bent and twisted them hard and watched as that rosiness turned pale until it eventually turned into a mess of rotten flesh. Panting, Lei Changming pounced at Shen Zichuan several times and attempted to grab the ladder, but failed. He shook his head hard. The cacophony of human voices gave him a splitting headache. He hastily crawled forward and bumped into a small table at the side. Wine and dishes splattered all over his half-naked body. He shouted, "Shen!" The tent reflected in Lei Changming's eyes suddenly righted itself. Blood splashed over his cheek. He opened his mouth wide. His body was still frozen in place, but his head had already gone rolling. It knocked against the wooden leg of the small table, its expression so vivid that it was nauseating. The laughter in the tent came to an abrupt stop. The candle flames were still flickering. Everyone still maintained their initial actions, but they looked like they had all gone stiff and were already dead. Wind blew through the open flap, revealing the drizzling scene outside where night was like the creeping silence, and extinguished the last of the candle flame. Shen Zichuan placed Yang Shan Shui, which he had pulled out from under the cushion, and wiped it in silence. Fresh blood, removed from the blade, left behind a long red scar on the cotton cloth. He wiped it very slowly. No one saw when he had drawn the blade, so they could only appreciate the sight of him wiping it patiently. Shen Zichuan inexplicably started to laugh. This laughter seemed to be the most unbridled one he had ever let loose these days. He kept the blade, held up his folding fan again, and stepped on Lei Changming's head to correct its position. Dancing, huh? Shen Zichuan lowered his eyes and said to Lei Changming, "Are you even worthy?" The soldier who was about to pee had only just let his pants down when someone sliced his throat and dragged him into the undergrowth. Small groups of Lei Changming's soldiers gathered at the foot of the watchtower to play dice, unaware that their own men were silently dwindling in numbers. "Tell the mess cook to save some meat and serve a plate to us. This rain falls like diarrhea. It's so unbearable. It'll be too hard to bear if we don't drink a little wine." The squad commander tossed the dice and lifted his head to yell at the man behind, "You go. Yes, you. You're getting in the way by standing here." With that, he lowered his head again. They put their heads together and chewed on the meat jerky as they tossed the remaining bit of copper coins they had left in the waistband of their pants into the bet, all of them hoping to get lucky. "Ain't this hand way too cursed?" One of them slapped his palm as if he was swatting at bad luck, then wiped and rubbed it on his thigh. He said, "I'm not playing any more." "No." Another one tugged at him. "That'd be no fun. We're entering the city tomorrow. Don't you need money to visit the brothels and get on the pleasure boats? Give it another go. You might get lucky." "Bah!" The one who wanted to leave spat at the face of the other party. "With our chief's reputation, do we still need money to enter the city and visit the brothels? Slutty whores don't deserve to ask for money. We are already doing them favors by patronizing them. Who knows if they will spread some filthy diseases to me? I'm not playing. Those in the tent seem to me like they are going to stay up all night. With the state they have drunk themselves into, I doubt they can even fight a battle tomorrow. I'm going to sleep for a few hours." As soon as this person turned around, he bumped into someone else. He hit his head on the armor and heard a thwack. The collision dazed him, and he blanked out for a moment before he started to push and shove at the other party. He cussed, "The fuck you blocking." There was a muffled sound of stabbing. This person did not even have the chance to speak when he fell forward with a blank stare. The forward trajectory of the body was blocked by the other party, and it fell back towards the crowd, who were still shaking the dice, and crashed into them. The dice promptly tumbled to the ground. The men were already in a bad temper from having to take the night watch, so they grabbed the man's collar, wanting to hit him. But when they turned him over for a look, they saw those eyeballs of his bulging out in a glare. The man was already dead. The Imperial Army swiftly drew their blades. Without giving these bandits the chance to react, they charged forth and cut them down. Blood splattered onto armors. Tantai, who wiped his face and shouted, "Kill!" Without the tip-off from the patrol squad, the soldiers that had already gone to rest in the camping grounds were caught off guard by the Imperial Army. Leading his men, Tantai who charged into the tent and covered their mouths and noses, and stabbed them one at a time, leaving behind a mattress of crimson red. The surviving bandits ran out of the military camp in a panic. They did not receive any orders, and so they ran around flustered in the rainy night like headless chickens. The campsite was already completely surrounded by the Imperial Army. The moment those wily old foxes who had hung out in the martial fraternity all year round saw those drawn blades, they instantly surrendered without a fight and crowded together as they waded across the muddy waters to kneel and beg for mercy. Xiao Qie spurred his horse over. Lang Tao Shui Jin trod its hooves before the crowd of people. The gerfalcon descended from the sky and landed on Xiao Qia's shoulder, bringing along a gust of bitterly cold wind as it closed up its wings. Xiao Qia's well-built body was like an ink-black cloud in the rainy night that blotted out the light. His back was to that faint and distant candlelight in the tent, while his gaze was like a blade so cutting that those prying glances vanished in a fluster. Tantai, who was doing a head count. Xiao Qia turned his horse around. His shoulders were already drenched. Meng tilted its head to look askance at that deadly still military tent, as if it knew that there were bloody fleshes inside for it to eat. Shun Zichuan was not in the tent. He was standing outside, carrying an umbrella with his head lowered to look at his own blood-stained boots. Xiao Qia leaned down, and Meng hopped onto Shun Zichuan's shoulder. Shun Zichuan raised his head and met Xiao Qia's eyes. "This young master," Xiao Qia lifted a finger and lightly scraped it across the tip of Shun Zichuan's nose. "Why are you standing here alone in the rain?" Shun Zichuan spread his little bamboo fan open to show it to Xiao Qia. He said a little sulkily, "My fan is dirty." There were a few splotches of blood splattered on the feebly open fan, like red plums spilling over the words. It was unlikable, no matter how one looked at it. What's more, these words were written by Xiao Qia himself. Ever since this fan was gifted to him, it never left Shun Zichuan's side, just like that blue handkerchief. The way those drops are splashed is pretty unique. Xiao Qia's gaze never left Shun Zichuan's face. He said, "Give this fan to me. I'll make you another one." Shun Zichuan inserted the fan at a slanting angle into Xiao Qia's back collar and nodded his head. Xiao Qia smiled at him and asked, "Was the feast delicious?" Shun Zichuan shook the umbrella open to shield both of them and answered, "Passable. It's too noisy." Xiao Qia dismounted and took over the umbrella. He only covered Shun Zichuan, leaving half of his own body exposed outside in the rain. He lifted the tent flap with one hand and surveyed the interior. After a period of time, he said, "There's something odd with this camp." Shun Zichuan raised his hand to cover up Meng, who wanted to fly inside, and said, "I don't think he's the same Lei Changming who is rumored to be able to subdue the two prefectures of Duanzhou and Dunzhou." Both of them were still talking when they suddenly saw Tantai, who hurrying over to them. The blood on Tantai, whose body had yet to be wiped away. He did not look too good as he paid his respects to both men and said, "Master, their numbers don't tally at all. I asked some squad commanders, and they couldn't even say how many men they have under them. It was only after I pressed them further that I learned that they are all bandits Lei Changming had just taken in. They are not men he brought along from Mount Luo." Chapter 108, Silver. Chapter 108, Silver. No wonder it was all so easy tonight. In that instant, Shun Zichuan came to an understanding about many matters. He abruptly looked back and was about to blurt it out when he held back and looked at Xiao Qia. "Lao Hu," Xiao Qia said swiftly. "Separate out 2,000 men to guard this place. Ding Tao, get on your horse and go around to the northeast of Cizhou. Tell the men lying in ambush to head south immediately and block the road on the southern side of Cizhou. The rest of you, follow me back to the city." This strategy of luring the enemy away from his base had been planned for a long time already. Very likely, it was already in the works before Lei Changming left Mount Luo. Those reports that were sent back to Cizhou from Mount Luo were all vague statements, the most frequent of which was their sightings of the earthen stoves built by the bandits in Mount Luo. This turned the precise number of Lei Changming's men into a matter of opinion. The mix of truth and falsehood, reality and pretenses, lured them into conveniently guessing that the 40,000 men were just a front. And so, they assumed that the other party would not dare to launch a surprise attack without careful consideration. No one would have expected the other party to harbor no intent to fight with Xiao Qia head-on at all. It's impossible for Kong Ling not to recognize Lei Changming. Shun Zichuan got on the horse using Xiao Qia's arms as support. "I suspect at this point that all the rumors about Lei Changming are false," Lei Changming is just this person's shell. Xiao Qie tossed the umbrella to Tantai Hu and covered Shen Zichuan up with his cloak. Then he put up his arms and turned his horse around. He said, "It's useless even if he holds Kong Ling under duress. Most likely, he wants to rely on Kong Ling to open Xizhou's gate. By doing this, he will be the one inside and we will be the ones outside." Xiao Qie was able to fight against Lei Changming's 40,000 men, all because he still had Xizhou's granary behind him to back him up. This allowed him to act promptly and swiftly cut down this mixed batch of soldiers who were already weary from being on the go. To think the other side knew their own shortcomings and did not fight with Xiao Qie head-on. Instead, they drew on their foe's strength to make up for their own deficiencies and turned Xiao Qie into a stray dog in the wilderness. They reversed everyone's initial position, causing the Imperial Army to be stranded outside with access to the military provisions cut off. "He has always been in the shadows all this while," Shen Zichuan said in the wind with his cloak around him. "He knows all our moves like the back of his hand. Xizhou is not our territory after all. He must have an informer in the city. Yet we know nothing about him." Xiao Qie suddenly laughed when he spoke to this point. He tightened his arms around him and said, "This man sure is something." By now, the rain had subsided. Only the night breeze still carried with it a few threads of rain. Horses' hooves trampled upon mud as they galloped noisily towards Xizhou. However, no matter how fast they were, they could not catch up with the speed of the other party. Kong Ling had already arrived in Xizhou. Kong Ling had been a weak scholar ever since he came out of obscurity to take up an official post, and he was almost 45 now. His bones almost fell apart on impact when he reined in his horse, and he could hardly catch his breath as he slid off the horse to the ground. He let the man hold him up in support, then cupped his hands at the man and said, It's all thanks to you this time. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Mister, you are too courteous." Even though this man looked competent and tough, he had been looking after Kong Ling the entire journey. "I'm afraid the pursuing soldiers behind us will be here in a flash. Mister, drink some water and we'll move on. Once we reach the foot of the city gate, get them to open the gate as soon as possible." They rested midway in an inn that still had lanterns hung up, although it was not to stay overnight, but to allow Kong Ling, whose legs were still trembling, to drink some hot tea and take a breather. The sides of Kong Ling's legs were badly scraped, making it inconvenient for him to sit down. He held the bowl in the hall to gulp down. As they were resting, they suddenly heard the sound of horse hooves outside. Although the man did not stand up, his hand quietly fell upon the blade at the side of his waist. He turned slightly sideways to hide his face in the darkness and looked at the door. A group of travel-worn travelers strode through the door, led by two men of similar stature. The strange thing was that this group of people were all tall and similarly well-built. Even though they were wearing the cotton clothes of commoners, they still had an imposing aura around them. One of them removed his bamboo hat to reveal a face with stubble and a lock of hair hanging down over his forehead. He swept a seemingly nonchalant glance at the two men in the hall who were still drinking tea. With a smile on his face, he tossed out a bag of money and said to the innkeeper, staying for the night, "1 deluxe room and 3 wide beds. Any cooked food left? Give us some steamed bun and braised beef with shaojiu wine. We have money, so why do you have to be so frugal?" The other one removed his bamboo hat too. He was powerfully built. He opened the bag of money and said to the innkeeper, "Deluxe rooms for all." A muffled cough rang out from the center that was surrounded by the men. An old man who was wearing a cloak all this while said in a lowered voice, "It's not easy for us to save up this money. We still have not reached the place. Let's endure it for one more day. Tianya. Let everyone rest after eating their fill. Don't goof around." Qiao Tianya blew at the hair that had fallen and took the bag of money back from Fei Xing's hands. He tossed it into the innkeeper's hands and said, "Do as I said earlier." Serve the wine and dishes as soon as possible, don't drag your feet. Shifu, you have braved the elements with us the entire journey, so how can we still let you sleep on the wide beds with us now that we are here? You are our elder. This is something we should do as a show of respect to you. Furthermore, if Master were to know that I let you sleep with us on the wide beds, he will definitely not be happy. Please take a good rest, and you'll be doting on us. Not to be outdone after Qiao Tianyao was done talking, Fei Xing immediately said, I was too insensible earlier. Shifu, let me help you up to rest. Once the dishes are served in a while, I'll bring them up to you. Ji Gang's physical strength was not as good as it was before, so he did not turn Fei Xing down and let Fei Xing guide him upstairs. Although Kong Ling did not know who these travelers were, he could sense that they were not one to be messed with. He was worried that they were also bandits, as they were all armed with blades. He thought about it, then put down his teacup and said to the man beside him, Warrior, I've had enough rest. Let's continue on our way. But before they could move, those travelers had already taken their seat. The inn was not big, and all the 4 square tables were fully occupied. No one knew if it was intentional or a coincidence, but Qiao Tianya sat down right beside Kong Ling and cut off Kong Ling's access path. Yo! Qiao Tianya poured tea for himself and said offhandedly, Are both of you in a hurry to get on with your journey too? The man curbed his air of toughness, turning himself into an ordinary farmer. He rubbed his hands and smiled shyly, as if he was not accustomed to dealing with unfamiliar inquiries like this, and said, I'm hurrying along with my eldest brother. Qiao Tianya did not think to make way on his own initiative. He drank the tea and narrowed his eyes slightly, as if he was scalded, and said, Where are you going? Perhaps we are going the same way. It hasn't been easy for us on this journey. Didn't some marquis include a rebel? It's all men from the local authorities on our way here. They are all so good at fishing for bribes that we are forced to take a detour. Sorry about this chatty mouth of mine. I've gotten carried away. Where are you going? Kong Ling could neither sit nor walk out. His inner thighs burned with pain. Maintaining his composure, his goatee quivered a little as he replied in Dengzhou dialect, Malian Town. You know of Malian Town, buddy? The town near Tizhou, huh? Then we are going the same way. We're heading for the city of Tizhou ahead of Malian Town. As Qiao Tianya spoke, he put up an arm on the table. He stared at the man and said, Buddy, you look familiar. At this point, the man had already sensed that he was being watched. He glanced at the figures of these travelers in his peripheral vision. The wheels turned a little in his mind, and he more or less could make some guesses about them. But he thought that these travelers were imperial bodyguards disguising themselves to hunt down and capture Shao Qie and Shen Zichuan, and that they were only suspicious because of the blade he was carrying. So he relaxed to appear more simple and honest as he answered, I'm a farmer from Dengzhou. As he spoke, he fumbled around his bosom and fished out a crumpled travel permit and a hand-copied household register. There was the official seal of Dengzhou on it. He opened it to show Qiao Tianya and said, We are going to Malian Town to visit our elder sister who has married over. She has just given birth, and they are hosting a banquet. Oh, a joyous event! Qiao Tianya was even happier than the man was. He said, I love kids the most. And when it comes to drinking wine, I love the ones at babies' 1-month celebrations best. Seeing as Qiao Tianya was still prattling on, Kong Ling forced a smile and said, The rain has stopped. In that case, we shall continue on our way. If not, it'll cost us money to stay here overnight. On the other side, Fei Xing had already come down the stairs. He did not notice it at first, but seeing as Qiao Tianya had never moved away after so long, he started to size up the man too. He suddenly flashed over and sat down behind the man, boxing him in from the front and back together with Qiao Tianya. What are you chatting about? Fei Xing picked up a steamed bun from the plate the waiter brought over and took a big bite out of it. He looked at them. Look at how well you're hitting it off. Chatting about sons. Xiao Tianyao moved the chopsticks over and said warmly, Have both of you eaten? You didn't have the time to yet, have you? Then, come on, let's have our meals together. Waiter, bring over 2 more pairs of chopsticks. Kong Ling also sensed something off by now. He wanted to sit down and interact with them, but the teacup suddenly overturned, splashing tea over the man. The man hurriedly got up. As he hastily wiped himself with his sleeves, he said to Fei Xing before him, Sorry. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he squeezed past Fei Xing and took 2 steps towards the waiter, pleading, Buddy, lend me a towel to wipe myself with. Fei Xing had already stood up. He exchanged glances with Xiao Tianyao. Their astute brothers, who had already taken their seats, all grasped their blades. Fei Xing strode out from behind and bumped into the man's right back shoulder fast and hard. He pulled the man up by his clothes and said, You did it on purpose, didn't you? The impact of the bump sent the man knocking into the table and chairs right in front of him. He almost lost his balance. His temples were drenched in sweat, and he was so anxious that he did not know where to put his hands. He repeatedly bowed to Fei Xing in a conciliatory manner and apologized. Sorry, this man did not know martial arts. Fei Xing cast another glance at Xiao Tianyao and shoved the man again. He yelled, Just my fucking luck. The man's entire body fell backward, tilting the table and chairs over as he crashed into them. He cut a sorry sight as the back of his head struck the corner of the table. Kong Ling exclaimed in surprise and said anxiously, Why did you hit out at him? He's bleeding. Only then did Xiao Tianyao feign to stop Fei Xing. He said to Fei Xing, Forget it. We are all travelers. Why put others in a spot? Fei Xing let loose a torrent of expletives and acted all like a bigwig as Xiao Tianyao persuaded him to go back. He even glared at that man several times. Their party started digging into their food. Fei Xing stood up again and said, I got so pissed that I forgot I still have to deliver the meal to Shifu. Kong Ling had already helped support the man to the entrance. The man touched the back of his head and came away with an entire hand full of blood. He glanced back at Xiao Tianyao and the rest as if he was fearful of them, then hastily shrank his head back, looking all timid and afraid of incurring trouble. He untied the horse and walked off into the night with Kong Ling. Only then did Fei Xing drop his act and asked, Why are you interrogating them? We are on the wanted list too. It's better to lie low now that we are about to reach the threshold of Cizhou. Don't stir up trouble. I always feel like this man. Xiao Tianyao drank 2 mouthfuls of shaojiu and thought about it for a moment with a frown. Is there really no reaction from him when you bumped into him? Nope. Fei Xing took 2 bites of the beef. The person himself can put on an act, but once his body is accustomed to reacting swiftly, then it'll be very difficult to control himself from parrying a sudden blow. This man is pretty weird, but he indeed doesn't seem to be a martial artist. What if he can indeed control himself? Xiao Tianyao suddenly asked. Then he's a formidable one. Fei Xing gestured with his chopsticks in the air. He will have to be of the same caliber as Ji Gangshifu. Think about his lordship. With a body like his lordship, there will be no way to hide it. His naturally endowed physique has blessed him with explosive strength. You have to be careful even when you approach him while he's asleep or you risk your own life. What's more touching him? This endurance can only be built up through years and years of practice. This man doesn't seem to be that old. So I doubt he can. Xiao Tianyao ate the dishes and did not ask further. When they had eaten and drunk their fill, the innkeeper worked out the bill for Xiao Tianyao. As he returned the silver, Fei Xing had nothing better to do, so he felt it up and realized something unusual. The weight and relative purity of this silver were subtly different from the silvers they had brought out of Kudu, the ones that had been minted and directly issued by the Ministry of Revenue. Although Fei Xing was usually a competitive man who loved to fawn on others, his special skill was unrivaled. With his suspicions aroused by these subtle differences, he held the silver high and scrutinized it for a moment before he asked Xiao Tianyao, "Zhongbua has had dealings with Jueshi all these years. Most of the silvers in circulation come from Jueshi, right?" "So it is said." Xiao Tianyao propped himself on the counter and turned his head aside to look at those silvers. This kind of new silvers is rarely seen. The businesses they do are all shady scalping deals, and the general public typically won't dare to use silvers from Jueshi directly. Everyone will exchange them into copper coins, or use silvers issued out from other areas. But with the state treasury empty during the reign of Xianda, there have been very few newly minted silvers from the various areas. The only one who can still have very new silvers is the Shi, the silver warehouses of the Shi clan, who own silver mines and mine silver. If these money did not come from Shun Zichuan's hands, then it came from the people who schemed to empty out the Shi clan's silver warehouses. Regardless of whether it was the former or the latter, both were important to them. Xiao Tianyao straightened up in a flash and said, "Leave half of the men in place to keep night watch and take care of Shifu. The rest of you, come with me. Fei the 10th, you were fucking wrong about him." Chase. Chapter 109, Jingzhe. Chapter 109, Jingzhe. Xiao Tianyao led the men out of the inn in pursuit. There were already no traces of both men on the street. Fei Xing mounted the horse from behind, pointed to the west and said, "Since he has been alerted, he should know that he can't remain here for long. He definitely won't be able to escape our eyes if he's in town. In all probability, he will choose to leave the town and take a detour to hurry towards Cizhou." According to the information Xiao Tianyao knew of, Shun Zichuan should still be in Cizhou. He stuffed that silver ingot back into his bosom. Before he could speak, he heard Ji Gang's voice behind him. Ji Gang gathered the cloak around him and drank up the bowl of medicine in his hand in one gulp. "Don't stop for my sake tonight. Let's head for Cizhou now. No matter what, we have to inform Chuaner of this matter first." As this concerned Shen Zichuan's safety, Xiao Tianyao knew that Ji Gang would definitely not rest tonight, so he motioned for the imperial bodyguards at the back to lead the horse over. Ji Gang got onto the horse and straightened his back. Then, with a jerk of the reins, he led the men in a charge towards the town gate. Kong Ling was miserable beyond description. Both his legs had been scraped until they were burning with pain. He did not say a word and followed with a frown behind the man's horse. Just as Fei Xing predicted, they did not linger further in the town, but left the town quickly with the man leading the way as they took a detour. "Mister, please bear with it for a few more hours." As the man spurred his horse on, he looked back to shout, "We will be able to reach the foot of Cizhou's city gate before daybreak." Kong Ling panted as he nodded and said, "Seems like the road is full of forked paths around here. I don't think they would be able to catch up even if they wanted to. But the rain has already stopped." The man's stamina was so good that he did not even gasp for breath once the entire journey. He continued, "Mister, there's no way our trail can be covered up now. They are bound to speed up their pursuit of us." Kong Ling pulled at the robe on his knees. He gritted his teeth and said, "Continue on. Warrior, we'll continue on our way. As long as we can reach the foot of Cizhou's city gate, we can avert disaster." That might be the case, but the path they had been taking was very muddy after they diverged from the public road. With their hooves stuck in the mud, the horses could not run at their original speed, and so it was with difficulty that both men traveled. Looking at the man's back, Kong Ling sighed and said emotionally, "It's all thanks to your help this time. If you still insist on returning to Lei Changming after we arrived at Cizhou, I'll select the best horse for you." The man let out a hearty laugh and said, "Mister, there's no need to stand on ceremony. This is what I should do. I'm just a soldier who only knows how to fight and kill. There are some things that need to be done by lofty scholars like you. I hold you in great esteem, and I'm already content to be able to travel with you tonight." Kong Ling was taken by surprise. He found this man to be a righteous man and felt a lump in his throat. Then he remembered Shen Zichuan, the turncoat who switched his allegiance to the enemy at the critical juncture, and could not help but wipe his eyes with his sleeve and said, "To think there are still such good men like you in Zhongbua. There's hope for Zhongbua's rejuvenation yet. Warrior, may I know how I should address you?" The man looked back and said, "My name is Piaopo. A crude and inelegant name like this isn't fit to be heard by Mister's ears. My parents are both honest people who make a living on the few mu of fields they have. There was a drought the year I was born, that's why my father gave me such a name." Tu Kong Ling hurriedly said, "Brother Piaopo is a righteous man. A name is but a momentary form of address. It sounds good to me." It was too dark for Kong Ling to see the path ahead. He did not know if the route Piaopo picked was too well hidden, but there were really no soldiers in pursuit of them. Kong Ling pounded his thighs. After looking up at the sky several times, he finally saw the first rays of dawn on the horizon as well as the city walls of Tizhou at the end. "Mr." Piaopo suddenly pulled at Kong Ling's horse and led him to ride alongside. "Tell the city officer to open the gate. We shall go pay our respects to His Excellency Zhou now." Both men galloped out of the path and trampled through the puddles of water. They had already arrived at the foot of Tizhou's city walls. Kong Ling hugged the neck of the horse, his energy all spent. He smoothed his goatee to tidy it up, then lifted his head to shout in a hoarse voice, "It's me!" Heads popped out above the battlement of the city walls. A military officer was shocked to see Kong Ling and could not help but blurt, "Mr. Chingfeng, quick, go get His Excellency." Kong Ling dismounted the horse with trembling legs. He handed the reins to Piaopo. "Tell him I'm back. Open the city gate immediately." Piaopo said, "Mister, then." Kong Ling nodded in response at the same time he gasped for breath. He bent over, with his hands on his knees, and said with a bitter smile, "Let me catch my breath. We are going to enter the city soon. It's only when we meet His Excellency that we can clear all suspicions of you. Otherwise, we will still end up delayed by the city officer's interrogation of you." Not long after, Zhou Gui hurried over. When he saw Kong Ling from above, he immediately said, "Chingfeng, what's going on? Quick, open the gate." The city gate made a dull noise as several soldiers from within lifted the horizontal bar and pushed the city gates open, letting through the first rays of the morning sun through the gap. Kong Ling wiped his sweat and moved to stride in first. There was a section of bridle path behind the city gate. Zhou Gui hurriedly descended from the city gates and led his man to the head of the bridle path, wanting to meet and receive Kong Ling. But Kong Ling, who had been walking in front, abruptly changed countenance and bellowed, "Shut the gates." The soldiers behind him who were still pushing against the city gate froze. But in that instant, Piaopo had already burst forth. He grabbed hold of Kong Ling's back collar and dragged him back in a swift retreat. However, Kong Ling staggered and half-kneeled on the ground, dragging his body and waving his hands as he shouted at Zhou Gui, "This man is up to something! Zhou Gui, tell the men to release the arrows. You mustn't let him go free." Zhou Gui had already taken a step forward. He shouted, "Take him down!" That originally docile horse suddenly neighed. It raised its hooves and turned around to trample over the soldiers who were pushing against the gate. Piaopo flipped atop the horse, and the horse instantly crashed its way out of the city gate. He hauled Kong Ling with just one hand, causing Kong Ling's entire body to be partially suspended at one side of the saddle with his legs and feet scraping across the ground as he was forcibly dragged along. Excellent strength. Such strength was by no means inferior to Xiaoqia. Kong Ling was unable to break free as he was dragged along at high speed. His back hit the iron buckle at the side of the saddle, which knocked the wind out of him. That thin and frail chest of his seemed as if it was about to be perforated from the strikes. He was forced to look at the sky while he struggled with his arms and kicked out with both legs as the man's grip on him tightened increasingly. he said. "Zhou Gui, release the arrows! This man has reinforcements." An irritated tisk escaped between Piaopo's lips. He suddenly lifted Kong Ling up by the neck and hollered at the soldiers surging out from the city gates. "Go ahead! Zhou Gui, release the arrows! We'll see if I die first or Mr. Qingfeng dies first." Zhou Gui was but a mere civil official. At this startling change, he pushed away the guards and shouted, "Stop!" Kong Ling had been strangled until his face had gone all red. He clawed at his collar with his 10 fingers. Piaopo moved his head closer to him and said with a smile, "Mr. is truly sharp. Weren't you still regarding me as a righteous man on our way here? So why have you turned against me?" Tantai long soldiers," Kong Ling gasped and said with difficulty, "are all from the three prefectures in the east. None of them is familiar with the roads in Xizhou." Piaopo burst out laughing. He settled down on the horse and said, "So I see. Mr. is truly formidable. You were still acting with such sincerity earlier. But since I've already arrived at Xizhou, do you think you can simply settle the matter by tricking me into the city and killing me?" He turned his head to the side and spat. "Too late." With that, those pursuing soldiers who had vanished earlier came forth from behind. Although they did not have the uniformed armor expected of a regular army, their numbers were terrifying. They were all dressed in various kinds of clothes, holding up their broadswords and swords as they urged their horses through the woods and grasses in a straight charge forth. Kong Ling could not even catch sight of the end of their line. "I told Lei Changming to tell you people a few months back that we want grains. Instead, you let the Imperial Army into the territory and let Shao Qia take over our granary." Lei Jingzhe flung Kong Ling to the ground. Reining in the turning horse, he motioned to Zhou Gui, "Do you think you can scare me into retreating by relying on Shao Qia's 20,000-strong Imperial Army? I repeatedly sent men to persuade you to surrender and pledge allegiance to me, but you keep putting off giving me an answer. Zhou Gui, you are now a traitor who financially aids the rebels. I'll rid the people of a scourge by massacring Xizhou today." Zhou Gui looked at those more than 10,000 men, and his heart went half cold. He even felt a little dizzy. He hastily held on to the person beside him for support and squeezed out the words through gritted teeth. "I can open the granary and give you grains. But you mustn't hurt the commoners of Xizhou." Lei Jingzhe cracked the whip, and the bandits behind him roared with laughter. The hooves of his horse trod around Kong Ling, and those people surrounded Kong Ling, forcing him to roll and crawl. Lei Jingzhe pointed to Kong Ling on the ground with his horsewhip and said, "Now I'm the host and you're the guest. The granary is already mine, whether or not you open it up. The fuck you still dare to negotiate with me when I'm taking my men home to eat?" Zhou Gui staggered a few steps and fumed. "We have already filled up half a granary worth of grains for you Mount Luo bandits last year when Xizhou was hit with famine. If not, how many people on Mount Luo would have starved to death? Can't you spare the commoners of Xizhou on account of this favor we've done you? What nonsense are you spouting?" Lei Jingzhe's expression suddenly underwent a change. He said coldly, "Lei Changming bought those grains last year with money at my behest." That was right. Lei Changming did indeed pay for the grains last year. But he bought half a granary worth of fine rice in Xizhou at the dirt-cheap price of unpolished rice. The total amount paid was so meager that it was not even enough to send away a beggar in Xizhou. Zhou Gui was so stunned by his brazenness and shamelessness that he could not breathe. Thumping his chest and stamping his foot in anger, he said, Are you people still human? Don't even think of entering the city today." Lei Jingzhe had already run out of patience. He knew that he would not be able to hide the truth at Lei Changming's end for long. The Imperial Army was very likely to be on the way already. So he lowered his voice and growled, "Zhou Gui, I merely want to enter the city to play for a few days. Must you insist on fighting with me against overwhelming odds like you would throw an egg against a rock?" Kong Ling trembled as he hunched over in the mud and let loose a sneer. With a fling of his sleeve, he pointed at Lei Jingzhe and let fly a torrent of curses. Play for a few days? When have you ever kept your men under control of all the times you people entered the city? For each time Lei Changming comes, more than 10 of the womenfolk in Xizhou would meet their end. Bah! You're clearly all rotten eggs, so what benevolent and righteous act are you putting on? Everyone will die if we let you enter the city today, so we the folks of Xizhou might as well fight you to the death together. The horsewhip at the rear struck Kong Ling so hard on his back that his skin and flesh split apart. Kong Ling initially thought that they could take this man down at the city gate, but he never expected the other party's soldiers to be following right behind them. He was very much aware that his gullibility this time had brought a catastrophe upon Xizhou. Overwhelmed with grief and sorrow, he bent over the ground and started vomiting. Lei Jingzhe rode his horse out and led his men in a straight charge towards Zhougui. He said, "Kill our way into the city. Once the imperial court's appointment order is issued, we will become the garrison troops of Xizhou who have eliminated the rebels for the imperial court." Zhougui saw that fierce horse charging right for him and those countless blades reflecting the morning rays behind him. With an unexpected burst of strength, and despite knowing that he should not do so, he still spread his arms apart and bellowed, "Even if I die today, I cannot let you enter the city." Sunlight pierced through the clouds on the horizon, and that wave of golden light broke through the darkness like the raging tides. With his eyes wide open, Zhougui watched as those blades came rushing right towards him. In that moment, the ear-piercing sound of a string being pulled rang out, and that twang from close to the ground reverberated through the air as an arrow hurtled right for Lei Jingzhe's head with a violent gust of strong wind following in its trail. The conqueror bow stood firm and steady in the wind. Under the shocked gazes of all those around him, Shao Qia held his pose of pulling the bow. The opening of the bone ring on his thumb shifted, revealing the penetrating and forbidding eyes behind the bowstring. Chapter 110. Son of a Concubine. Chapter 110. Son of a concubine. Lei Jingzhe did not dare to be too complacent. Unable to dodge in time in his haste, he could only brandish his broadsword to ward off the blow. The arrow struck the blade with a loud clang, and the impact numbed Lei Jingzhe's entire arm. He promptly and decisively spurred his horse past Zhougui in an attempt to lead his men into charging into the city. "Shut the gates quick!" Zhougui was swept off his feet and thrown to the ground. Paying no mind to the sorry sight he presented, he lifted the hem of his robe and shouted at the city soldiers. Pressing their shoulders against the city gates, the city soldiers bellowed in unison and shoved the gates towards the center to shut it. But Lei Jingzhe's horse was faster. His blade arrived at the same time as his horse, cutting down the men who were pushing away at the gates. He was just about to drive straight in to take over Xizhou, but in that critical moment, Lei Jingzhe felt a chill at the back of his head and swiftly bent the upper half of his body over. Following right after, the back of the horse sank as a youth of about 16 or 17 of age climbed onto it. Ding Tao's slashed his palm towards Lei Jingzhe's neck. Lei Jingzhe turned aside to dodge it and backhandedly made a stab at Ding Tao's chest and abdomen. Ding Tao clung onto the saddle and slid down to evade the blade. His legs touched the ground, and he raced along with the madly galloping horse for a few moments before he hoisted himself up with his arms and clambered back up again. "Hey!" Ding Tao gripped Lei Jingzhe's arm and raised a hand to fling a brush worth of ink onto Lei Jingzhe's face when he turned back. For all Lei Jingzhe's plotting, he never expected such a move from the youth who had come to the rescue. He could no longer see his surroundings with the ink splashed in his eyes, but he had a keen sense of hearing. The instant Ding Tao launched a sneak attack on him, he sensed Ding Tao's movement, and in their confrontation, he hauled Ding Tao by the collar and flung him off the horse. Ding Tao fell heavily on the ground and felt the stab of pain in his back. He yelled out in pain, but before he was done yelling, a horse's hoof came aiming right for him. Ding Tao hurriedly rolled over to dodge the hoof. But as he rolled over, his back was inadvertently exposed right under Lei Jingzhe's eyes. It's now or never. Lei Jingzhe promptly hurled his steel blade out. Ding Tao wanted to evade it, but a bandit who had caught up with them from behind grabbed hold of his ankle. He was forced to sprawl flat in the muddy water. He propped himself against the ground with both arms, wanting to lift himself up, but he was dragged down again. The steel blade was already right behind him. With his face all smeared with filthy mud, Ding Tao gritted his teeth and straightened up his upper body to shout at those in the city, "Open up the south gates. The reinforcements are here." Lei Jingzhe cussed in fury. But then he saw the steel blade he had hurled out intercepted midair by an extremely narrow sheath. The impact of the collision sent his blade hurtling off course until it stabbed into the ground at a slanting angle and remained there. Ding Tao was still badly shaken as he turned back for a look. The bandit who had been yanking his ankle earlier was already dead, his head separated from his body. Ding Tao immediately crawled up from the ground, hopped several times in succession, then poked his head out from behind Shen Zichuan and said to Lei Jingzhe, "You're dead meat." One side of the city gates had already been shut. Lei Jingzhe led his men to crowd at the entrance of the bridle path to squeeze their way through but was obstructed. He recognized the man blocking his path. The entire outfit of white peeking out from under the cloak was a color the other man had not changed out of after leaving Kudu. Lei Jingzhe's horse took a few steps back, but then, in the next instant, he brandished his whip and barged his way over. Shen Zichuan pulled off his cloak and tossed it into Ding Tao's arms. Lang Tao Shuijin raised its hooves and charged forth. In the split second the wind rose, Yang Shan Shui had already left its sheath. Lei Jingzhe's broadsword slipped out of his hand. Right before he was about to collide with Shen Zichuan, he drew out his subordinate's broadsword in passing. The neighing of the horse was just like the sounding of a war horn. The forces of both powers collided as the edges of their blades met and let out a shrill shriek in unison, the sound so piercing that it made one quake with fear. Lei Jingzhe had encountered an opponent who was completely different from the ones he had faced in the past. That terrifying strength of his seemed to have plunged into water. No matter how forceful and fierce he was in wielding his blade, it would all be neutralized by a force as gentle as water until it eventually dissolved into nothingness. The more he went all out, the more it felt like he was being led around by the nose by Shen Zichuan. Gradually, he found himself trapped into a vicious cycle in which he could never escape from. Lei Jingzhe was very shrewd. He held up his broadsword and pushed back, pretending as though he was going to launch a sudden strike, but in the next instant, he turned around and fled. The earlier opportunity had already slipped him by. He was already harboring thoughts of retreating at Ding Tao's "Reinforcements are here" earlier, and it was also evident that his men had already been surrounded by Shao Qi. If he did not withdraw post-haste and insisted on staying on to attack the city, then he would be trapped in a situation where he was besieged on all sides. He would not be able to hold out for long. Retreat. Lei Jingzhe took the lead and turned his horse in the southeast direction. Shen Zichuan did not give chase. Shao Qi, who was still in the east, leaped onto his horse and led his men to follow after Lei Jingzhe in hot pursuit. Lei Jingzhe whipped his horse and tore off at great speed. Amid all the jolts and bumps, he looked back and pointed at Shao Qi from afar, then at Shen Zichuan and bellowed savagely, "We will meet again." The bandits wore no armors, so their speed was faster. Plus, they were already good at fleeing to begin with. All of them dashed back to the mountain forest without any regard for battle formation. In the blink of an eye, all of them had fled helter-skelter, shouting loudly as they hid among the undergrowth. Once again, Shao Qi lifted the conqueror bow. The sound of the string being drawn on that powerful bow that weighed 100 kadi was bone-chilling. Shao Qi's eyes stared fixedly at Lei Jingzhe's back. Lei Jingzhe was about to dart into the mountain forest, yet Shao Qi still seemed to have no intention of releasing the arrow. With a cry, Meng whirled around and nosedived down to pounce right at Lei Jingzhe with its sharp talons held in a hook, aiming right for Lei Jingzhe's eyes. Lei Jingzhe knew that this did not bode well, and he was forced to slow down. He waved his hands to cover his face and turned around to dodge the incoming blow. At this precise instant, Xiao Qie, who was behind him, released his fingers. The arrow burst forth like a golden ray shooting out from the blazing sun, its afterimage and the wind trailing closely behind its tail. In just the moment it took to gasp for breath, it had already arrived right before Lei Jingzhe's eyes. In this perilous juncture of life and death, Lei Jingzhe dragged over his subordinate beside him and leaned the entire half of his body back. At the same time, he exerted all his strength to shove the man before his own body. The arrow pierced through the chest of the subordinate, and the force of it sent Lei Jingzhe falling off his horse. He rolled on the ground, climbed to his feet, and tossed away the body, then got on his horse and continued to flee. Zhou Gui met Shen Zichuan at the foot of the city gate. Not knowing if he should cry or laugh, he wiped his face and said, "What perfect timing! You came just in time." Shen Zichuan dismounted to help Kong Ling up personally. He said remorsefully, "I'm sorry to have made Mr. Chingfeng suffer." Seeing his impeccable etiquette, Kong Ling waved his hand. Supporting himself up, he looked at the Imperial Army and said, "There's no need for the Vice Commander to take it to heart. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to take down the bandit. But when all is said and done, I did not inform you in advance." Shen Zichuan turned his head back to call out to Ding Tao, "Go get a clean robe for Mr. and call the physician over too." For Cizhou's sake, Kong Ling would not hold a grudge against Shen Zichuan. Although he still had some ill feeling, he understood that there was a reason for Shen Zichuan's actions, and so he let Ding Tao support him as he bowed to Shen Zichuan. Xiao Qie, who had also gotten off his horse, walked swiftly towards them. "I never thought there would be another person behind Lei Changming." Kong Ling looked at the mountain forest. He had just survived a great catastrophe, yet he was still plagued by worries and anxiety. He said, "This man is heartless and skilled at disguises. He's also cautious to boot. Now that we have let him escape today, there will surely be trouble again in the future." If his lordship and the vice commander had not arrived in time, Cizhou would not have escaped this calamity. Zhou Gui put down his sleeves and gave both of them a long, deep bow. "It was because your excellency showed no fear in the face of danger that bought us time." Xiao Qie turned his head aside to wipe away the dust off his face. He said, "The Imperial Army still has troops lying in ambush at the public road south of Cizhou. There are also troops stationed at the old camp Lei Changming left behind in the east to stand guard. He is already surrounded by the Imperial Army. It won't be easy for him to escape. It's all thanks to your lordship's reinforcements from the south that he eventually retreated." Kong Ling sighed with emotion. "Your lordship is wise. We'll send someone to open the south gate right away." Xiao Qie laughed and looked at Shen Zichuan. But he did not say a word. Shen Zichuan said, "There's no need for your excellency and Mr. to rush. The Imperial Army's reinforcements are still on the public road more than 10 li away." Stunned, Zhou Gui looked at Ding Tao and said, "Then, that means Ding Tao's back was still hurting." When he saw everyone looking at him, he hurriedly nodded his head solemnly and replied, "They are still on the public road and are not heading towards Cizhou. On our way here, young master told me to yell that phrase when I'm in a desperate situation, saying that it's a magical weapon that would lead us to victory. Sure enough, that man fled after I shouted it." Kong Ling faced Shen Zichuan and made to bow again. He said, "Vice Commander, please accept this bow of mine." Lei Jingzhe wanted to lure the Imperial Army away and charge right into Cizhou all because he feared a confrontation with Xiao Qie head-on. This man was very smart. He did not know if Xiao Qie had real capabilities to speak of, but he was unwilling to stake his troops on this gamble with Xiao Qie at this point in time. That was why Shen Zichuan knew for certain that he would flee instantly as soon as he thought there were still reinforcements at the south. However, if an adult among them were to speak of reinforcements, they would not be able to convince Lei Jingzhe right away. Only Ding Tao, who yelled it out at the most critical juncture when his life was hanging in the balance, would be able to make Lei Jingzhe believe him without a doubt. My good lad. Zhou Gui liked Ding Tao so much at this moment that he wanted so much to acknowledge the latter as his son. He patted Ding Tao several times and praised, "You make it sound so convincing that even I believed it." Ding Tao's back was in pain, but he did not dare to voice it out, and so he could only endure it and nodded his head vigorously. I initially thought he was merely a bandit who had forcibly occupied the mountain forest. Kong Ling walked into the city with them and said, but his way of speaking throughout the journey here was really out of the ordinary. Although he claimed to be from a poor and humble background, I don't think that's the case. He had control over Lei Changming, yet he's a generation younger than Lei Changming. I made several attempts to guess who he is, but I couldn't figure it out. He let Lei Changming be the chief, yet he could freely deploy these bandit soldiers. This is a clear indication that this man is someone who moves around Lei Changming year in and year out. Seen from an outsider's perspective, this man is likely a trusted subordinate or equivalent. Xiaoqia lifted his hand to lead Lang Tao Xuejin. Not only that. Shen Zichuan, who had given it some deep thinking last night, added, given Lei Changming's headstrong character, he would not be willing to lower himself to be someone else's chess piece. The fact that this man has such power and influence among the bandit soldiers shows that Lei Changming had never suspected him before and believed in him completely. It's much easier for bloodkin to achieve such a level of trust with Lei Changming. Mr. Tringfeng, does Lei Changming have any relatives? Kong Ling thought for a moment before he replied, Lei Changming's family is poor. I only heard that he has a younger sister who married the commander of Duanzhou's garrison troops as a concubine. Later, Bianxia invaded, and his younger sister and the commander were both massacred. He sucked in a breath and said, that's it. His younger sister bore the commander a son. The son of a concubine from the Zhu clan in Duanzhou. Zhou Gui added, I remember it now. When I was still a tax circuit intendant during the reign of Yongyi, I followed His Excellency to participate in the baby's 1-month celebration banquet. Although the child Lei Changming's younger sister gave birth to was a son of common birth born of a concubine of the Zhu clan, he was the eldest son, the first son of Zhu Jie, the commander of Duanzhou at that time. If it's really him, then it's not surprising for him to have that kind of shrewdness. Kong Ling turned his head to explain to Shen Zichuan and Xiaoqia. The value of the mother depends on her son, and mother and son lived well in the Zhu's residence. But after Zhu Jie's principal wife gave birth to a legitimate son of direct descent, they were both disdained and spurned by Zhu Jie. Just as Shen Zichuan was about to ask the name of this person, Zhou Gui suddenly exclaimed aloud and stared dazedly at Shen Zichuan. The vice-commander's mother was also present at the full-month celebration banquet. Chapter 111, Mother. Chapter 111, Mother. The moment the words left Zhou Gui's mouth, he felt he had been too presumptuous. Shen Zichuan's birth mother was called Bai Cha, but she was not a lady of the Bai clan from the Qidong Zijuan commandery. She was called by this name because when she was still in the establishment, someone praised her for being as pure as white jade, as if made out of porcelain. Whether her face is heavily or lightly painted, she beats them all in the establishment. At that time, Duanzhou was still a well-known red-light district in Zhongbua, where the world's beauties gathered. The literati vied with each other to organize banquets to critique these flowers, and came out with a ranking list for those in the establishment. Every season, they would deliberate over the commentaries and adjust the ranking of the beauties on the list. Bai Cha was the most popular flower during the reign of Yongyi, and in all of 5 years, she was never dethroned from her top rank. Each time she listened to the commentary of the courtesans through the screen, everyone in Duanzhou would turn out en masse. When she danced for the Prince of Jianxing, Shun Wei, there would be huge crowds of people thronging the streets of the establishment. Countless people climbed onto the ridges of roofs or stepped on the shoulders of others, all just to catch a glimpse of that faint figure of hers through the layers upon layers of hanging drapes. Her beauty became more and more legendary in those odes of the flowers that others fall over themselves to sing. Even Emperor Guangqing, who resided deep in the imperial palace, had heard of her. Wanting to take advantage of the emperor's inspection tour to catch a glimpse of this beauty in person, he had repeatedly asked Hai Liangyi, who was still the Grand Secretariat Deputy Grand Secretary back then, when will the inspection tour be scheduled? Zhou Guo had previously seen Bai Cha during the Zhu clan's newborn baby boy's full-month celebration banquet, but he had only sneaked a peek at that legendary beauty through a gap in the screen. Lei Changming's younger sister was initially from the establishment too. Before she was taken as a concubine by the Duanzhou commander, she was an old hand who could be considered a mama when coaching the fledglings. It was on behalf of the girls of the establishment that Bai Cha went to attend the banquet and send congratulations. This had all happened many years ago, and Zhou Gui's memory of it was already pretty vague. But when he looked at Shen Zichuan earlier, he realized that Shen Zichuan's side profile was rather similar to Bai Cha's, and so in a moment of excitement, he had inadvertently blurted it out. Without a change in expression, Shen Zichuan said, "Then that's really a coincidence." He was not intrigued, nor was he worked up. His memory of his birth mother was a blank piece of paper. Even though he had heard hundreds of rumors about her, there was no trace of her in his mind that was worth remembering. The role of mother in his life belonged to his Shenyang, Hua Pingting, just like the role of the father belonged only to his Shifu, Ji Gang. That was why he would go to great lengths to kill and destroy Ji Lei, who had harmed Hua Pingting. The two people who gave him life were never involved in Shen Zichuan's life. Bai Cha died early and never left so much a word for Shen Zichuan, while Shen Wei detested Shen Zichuan. The princess consort of Jianxing was in charge of all domestic matters in the residence. Before the age of 7, Shen Zichuan and Shen Wei had only met a grand total of 7 times, and all of that had been during the family feast during the spring festival celebration. He and Shen Wei never even had an exchange of words that would have been expected between a father and son. Shen Wei's loathing of him, however, was evident. They were not like father and son. Rather, they were more like mortal enemies born to abhor each other. Shen Zichuan's life in the Prince of Jianxing's residence was confined to a corner of an eave in the inner courtyard. He could not leave his own courtyard arbitrarily. His daily leisure activity was to sit on the veranda and count the white clouds that drifted past that small corner of the blue sky every day. When he was 7 years old, he could already recognize a lot of words, and he learned all these on the sly by digging his way out of the dog hole in the courtyard every month to eavesdrop under the windows of the school Shinzhouji and his other older brothers attended. At that time, the power struggle between several of his older brothers, who had already come of age, was extremely intense. Even the various concubines of his father were scheming against one another. It was pandemonium in the entire inner courtyard, so much that even Shen Wei himself was reluctant to return home and stay. He kept a mistress outside the residence, and lived there for several months in a year, turning a blind eye to the strife within the residence. Later, Shen Zhouji, who was a son of direct descent born by the principal wife, emerged victorious and sent all his brothers, who were born by the concubines and who had already come of age, away to the various prefectures to take up various respectable sinecures. The princess consort of Jianxing was worried that those sons born of concubines who had yet to grow up would later cause trouble again in the future. So she decided to send them away, ostensibly to settle them down in their ancestral home in Chazhou with a teacher hired to teach them. In truth, however, it was to eliminate the possibility that a son born of a concubine could ever compete for power again. Shen Zichuan was the only son whom Shen Wei personally issued a directive to have him sent to the old residence in Duanzhou. Shen Wei even refused to let him attend school or even hire a teacher for him. In that residence, he was taken care of by a deaf and dumb old woman servant who was also hard of seeing, while a maidservant his mother had left in the old residence would take over the job if he stepped out of the residence. That woman was greedy for money. Every month, she would siphon off the silver allocated by the Prince of Jianxing and cut down on Shen Zichuan's meals. 3 meals a day gradually became 2 meals a day until it eventually became 1 meal a day. What's more, these were all cold leftovers. Shen Zichuan felt the hunger in his tummy when he thought to this point. He loosened his grip on Yang Shan Shui and said, "Ding Tao, help Mr. Tringfeng inside to have a change of clothes. Suen and I will play the host today and invite both gentlemen to a meal. We will talk about it in detail during the feast." Zhou Gui was not an articulate speaker, and Kong Ling was afraid he might say something else to incur Shen Zichuan's displeasure, so he hurriedly grasped Zhou Gui by the arm and let Zhou Gui support him into the city. Zhou Gui was still turning around in circles after Kong Ling finished changing his clothes. He said anxiously, "Say, why did I go and mention that?" "Really?" Kong Ling said, "Of all things to mention, you had to go and mention that. Doesn't bringing it up make it seem like you are suspecting him of being involved with the traitors? Fortunately, both of them are not suspicious by nature. Otherwise, we would be in a quandary. It was a slip in a moment of haste. I'll have to apologize to the vice commander later during the feast." Zhou Gui sighed and said, "He came to help Cizhou out of a fix. I can't trample on his goodwill like this. Don't make a conscious effort to bring it up during the feast." Kong Ling sat up and thought for a moment before saying, "If Shen Zichuan is such a narrow-minded person, he wouldn't have come. If you take this matter too seriously and insist on apologizing to him, then it'd look like you and I are the ones who are bothered by it. Besides, he might not really care about this matter. Compared to his mother, Shen Wei is the one who is truly abominable." It was not appropriate for them to let Shen Zichuan and Xiao Qia wait for long, so they only took a short break before setting off for the feast. Despite it being called a feast, it was actually just a simple lunch. Everyone had been rushing on their way over last night, and then they had engaged in close combat with the bandits at the foot of the city today. Shen Zichuan took Kong Ling's age into consideration and did not keep them further for social engagement. Once they were done with their meals, he let Kong Ling head back early for a rest. Xiao Qia had to make arrangements for the Imperial Army's patrol, and he still had to dispatch someone to the old camp to keep in touch with Tantai who. By the time he was done busying around, it was nearly dusk. He searched around and found Shen Zichuan at the top of the city walls. "There's still work to be done after tonight." Xiao Qia climbed up to the top of the city wall and said, "I thought you were still taking a short break in the courtyard." "I slept for an hour." Shen Zichuan turned his head back to gaze at Xiao Qia. "There is still something on my mind. I won't be able to sleep even if I try." Xiao Qia inclined his head and patted Meng, who was perched on his shoulder, to tell it to go and play by itself. He did not have the time to change his clothes, and so there was still dust and dirt on him as he stood beside Shen Zichuan. He asked, "What can you see from here?" Shen Zichuan looked at the rise and fall of the mountain forest. The impending darkness that was about to blanket the sky was still huddled among the shade of the trees, while the inclining orange-red sunset shone in the sky at a side. Meng soared among them, like a pebble running rampant among a sea of silk-tree flowers, stirring up clouds of waves. "The future," Shen Zichuan answered calmly. "In the future, Cizhou will be the button that connects the Libei's merchant route. We'll open up a bridle path in the southwest that leads straight to Hezhou, and it'll end at the entrance of the berth in Hezhou. That way, from dismounting to embarking, all the commercial goods can arrive at Yongyi Harbor in half a month. The Shi clan's fleets of ships can open up trading opportunities with local specialties internally and exotic rarities externally. The silver warehouses that had been cleaned out can one day fill up again. I do not begrudge those money or where they have gone. We will have even more in the future. Xizhou is also behind Danzhou and Duanzhou, which have become the gates of Zhonghua. If they want access to the grains and commodities in the future, then they can only live in harmony with Xizhou. No doubt there is a need to strengthen defenses after the reclamation of Danzhou and Duanzhou. The rebuilding of the garrison troops is of urgent priority. You have to be very careful in your choices. Let those you can trust and who are up to the task attend to garrison duties. But those who are capable might not necessarily be willing to submit to another. When the time comes, Xiaoqia turns around and points in Li Bei's direction. I'll build an armored cavalry barracks on the southeast of the northeast provisions bridle path. If anyone dares to mess around, just send me a whistle, and I'll lead my men right over. Shen Zichuan laughed and said softly, Xizhou is too important to you and me. This city cannot be ceded over to anyone else. Zhou Gui is a good official, but he isn't suited to be the prefectural prefect of an entire prefecture. He can't save anyone by relying on zeal alone, especially in this situation where he is surrounded by a pack of wolves lying in wait on all sides. We are short of people. Xiaoqia had been thinking about this matter ever since he left Lei Changming's old camp. If Xizhou were to be the starting point for both of them, then they would be increasingly stretched as the territory expanded. This strain referred to the lack of capable, right-hand men to administer official affairs. If Qiao Tianya or Chen Yang was still around, then the perilous situation of Xizhou today might not have materialized, but their position that was currently not obvious would still gradually go on to reveal contradictions. Zhou Gui is suited to be the tax circuit intendant of the 6 prefectures. His love for the people is fundamental. A man like this would never let officials and merchants collude for selfish gains when he goes around on an inspection tour. But he's also too benevolent. He won't dare to mete out severe punishments. That's why he can't suppress the local hoodlums. It was precisely because Kong Ling has an assessment of Zhou Gui's character that he went to him to help him get rid of the obstacles in his way and to help him handle matters efficiently. Shen Zichuan spoke unhurriedly. If both of them can continue to work as one, then they would still be able to achieve plenty in the future. That Lei Jingzhe? Xiaoqia asked. What do you think of him? This man must be defeated without a doubt. Shen Zichuan moved along the battlements of the city wall and took a few steps forward. He said, I also thought he was something when we left the camp, but I no longer think so after seeing his bearing and behavior today. As expected, you and I are on the same wavelength. Seeing as it was getting dark, Xiaoqia moved next to Shen Zichuan and walked together with him. He said, Lei Changming is his uncle related by blood. In order to get a head start in Xizhou, he left Lei Changming behind at the camp as an abandoned chess piece. In doing so, he might not be able to win his men over. And in his attempt to dodge the arrow when he was fleeing, he used the henchman by his side as a shield. From these 2 incidents, we can see that this man has no lack of shrewdness but is severely lacking in benevolence. If he wants to submit and pledge allegiance to Kudu and obtain an official position there, he will have to turn the bandits under his command into a regular army. But he still doesn't seem to understand yet that being a bandit is very different from being a general. Prestige and trust are not something that can be accumulated by brutality alone. He keeps changing his orders again and again on the battlefield. As they say, a general does not retract the order he has given. He has to be impartial in dishing out rewards and punishments, and he must remain steadfast and unwavering. Only then will he be able to lead and command the soldiers. He is simply not cut out to be a general at all. That's why I'm more worried about Qi Juin than this man. Shen Zichuan hesitated before the stairs. He said, the marriage alliance between Qidong and the Hua clan cannot be reversed. Now that Li Bei has rebelled, Qidong is the last crutch that Kudu has left to rely on. Within the next few days, Qi Juin will no doubt receive a promotion and a noble rank. The Empress Dowager already has great admiration for her to begin with. Once her noble title is confirmed, it would be time for her to deploy troops north. No matter what, I have to turn Sizhou into an impregnable fortress before Qi Juin arrives. The commander-in-chief isn't an easy one to fight. My eldest brother is the heavy cavalry, Lu Guangbai is the guerrilla, while Qi Juin is the cavalry and infantry combined. Having resided in the Zhangjuan commandery for a long time, she won't deploy the troops easily, but she has a tendency to launch a violent assault and storm the enemies. Back then, when she penetrated deep into the desert to save Qi Shiyu, she was like the sudden onslaught of rainstorm that gave her opponents a jolt. It's her usual practice to cut down foes with one blow to strike fear in the heart of others, so that when they faced her in battle, they will not help but be frightened. Xiao Qia mulled it over for a moment. I want to fight a battle with her. Shun Zichuan looked at him. Xiao Qia patted his shoulder and said, It's not like I want to fight her now. The way you look at me is so fierce. Shun Zichuan took a step down the stairs. As if remembering something, he looked back and asked, Where's my fan? Xiao Qia pinched his chin and strode down 3 steps with one stride. Then he crouched down before him and said, Come on up, and I'll give it to you. Chapter 112. Chasing the Stars. Chapter 112. Chasing the stars. The setting sun faded away, replaced by a scattering of stars that adorned the sky peeking through the tree branches. The Imperial Army's patrol squad made their rounds around the streets and alleys. Giving Shen Zichuan a piggyback, Xiao Qia walked along the street shrouded under a cloak of shadows. It was a little hot this summer night, and Xiao Qia had his ceremonial outer garment open as he walked at a speed that was not fast. Shen Zichuan lifted his head high and put his chin on top of Xiao Qia's hair. Xiao Qia was too tall, causing the upper half of Shen Zichuan's body to be exposed to the moonlight. He only had to turn his head, and he would have been able to look over the wall into other people's courtyards. I'll head for the old camping grounds tomorrow morning and intercept his escape route from the east. He won't dare to head north, and there are troops lying in ambush to the south. I'll be back in 3 days at the very latest. Supporting Shen Zichuan, Xiao Qia said, It has been a long time since we last got news of Kudu. We have to send someone to make inquiries as soon as possible. Only then will we know of Qi Juin's movement. The marriage between Hua and Qi has been delayed again and again. To seek external aid, the Empress Dowager will not let Qi Shiyu wait any longer. Shun Zichuan estimated the dates and said, The wedding will not be delayed beyond the 8th month at the very latest. Hua Xiangyi can go right ahead and marry all she wants. Xiao Qia said, As long as she doesn't have an heir, it's still Qi Juin who has the final say in Qidong. She's going there to be the second wife, and she's even younger than Qi Juin. If she gives birth to a son, he will be sure Shiyu's legitimate son of direct descent. Once Qi Shiyu croaks, mother and son will be the hidden obstacle that stands in the way of Qi Juin from holding on to military power. The prestige of the commander-in-chief among the troops cannot be underestimated. Will she really fear a brother of direct descent who is younger than her by so many years? Shun Zichuan thought and said, If she seeks peace back at home and lives in harmony with Hua Xiangyi, then she would instead save herself a lot of trouble. It hasn't been easy for Qi Juin to be conferred a title. It's evident from the setbacks she faced when she took over Qidong's 5 commanderies. Not only is Kudu deeply uneasy over her gender, but even Qidong internal military administration officials had also begun to stir. At this point, Xiao Qia paused for a moment before he continued, Besides, I have already handed over the genealogy records that I got someone to copy to Qi Juin a long time back in Kudu. Just with this alone, she will never let Hua Xiangyi give birth to a child. As long as Hua Xiangyi's standing in Qidong remained shaky, the Empress Dowager would never be able to turn the Chidong's garrison troops into her own right-hand men. However, this was all based on the premise that Kudu still had no real emperor. If Kudu were to push forth a new emperor before winter arrived, then Qi Juin would be on track to face off Li Bei. "I'm worried about Lu Guangbai." Xiao Qia kept his relaxed expression in check and said, "After autumn, the Biantia cavalry will cross the boundary into our territories to plunder food. This is the time when their horses are plump and well-fed, and they will choose to take a risk in order to better survive the winter. The Bianjuan commandery relies on Dazhou to allocate and distribute their military provisions. The 12 tribes of Biantia are well aware that they are poor, and they also know that the granary is built right in Bianjuan, and it's close to the camp. That's why they would go after Lu Guangbai every time. Chidong's military provisions this year were cut by half. He's by far the worst off when it comes to surviving and defenses. My leaving of Kudu only serves to exacerbate the situation and make matters worse for him." But this was something that even Shun Zichuan had no way to help. If Bianjuan's position had not been so far east, and if there had not been Tianfei Watchtower and Suotian Pass stationed on both sides, then perhaps they could still send a message to Guqingqing, who was still in Jueshi's Yongyi harbor, and get Shidan to think of ways to buy a batch of grains from Jueshi and send it to Chidong through Hezhou as an emergency measure for Lu Guangbai. But Bianjuan just had to be to the east of Tsangjuan. There were obstacles both to the left and right, and there was no other passage unless they transported it right under Tsangjuan's nose. Chidong was not Jueshi either. Qi Juin had set up layers upon layers of impenetrable defenses there. It was simply impossible to think of passing through it without so much as sound. Bianjuan was just like the night watchman standing on the edge of a cliff. It was a place similar to a desperate and hopeless situation. Finding the atmosphere heavy, Xiao Qia turned a circle with Shun Zichuan on his back and said, "The utmost priority now is still to pursue and attack Lei Jingzhe. Once we manage to secure Zhongbua, it'll be easier to help Bianjuan. As long as we can cross over Tianfei Watchtower, we will be able to arrive there directly. Why are you still sniffing when I'm reeking of sweat all over?" Shun Zichuan wiped off the beads of sweat on the side of Xiao Qia's neck with his fingers. He snuggled against his cheek and said, "Start running." Xiao Qia jerked him once and answered, "Too tired to run." Shun Zichuan pinched Xiao Qia's cheek and said, "If the second young master can't do it, then I'll do it." Xiao Qia made a show of going to put him down and said, "Get down. This second young master shall see how you are going to carry me back tonight." Shun Zichuan tightened his arms around him. As he lifted his legs up, he said in all seriousness, "Why get so fired up over a minor matter? You can do it." Xiao Qia lifted him up again. Shun Zichuan clung onto his back and edged his fingertips down along the front flaps of his clothes, pulling it down as he said into his ear, "Why can't Erlang do it? Erlang can do anything." Xiao Qia turned his head. He was surprisingly calm as he asked, "Where to?" Shun Zichuan said, to. Shun Zichuan had not finished his words when Xiao Qia took a stride out with his long legs and broke into a run. Carrying Shun Zichuan on his back, he ran past the tree shades, stepping upon the moonlight of the summer night as he made his way into the alley where the lights were already extinguished. The patrol squad came and went, but they never noticed both men's figures. Xiao Qia easily leaped across the small steps, where dappled shadows of trees fell upon his hair. There was a clatter as their shadows crashed into and broke up the starlight on the ground, like the free and reckless wind among heaven and earth. The young servant boy guarding the door to the small courtyard was still yawning. When he heard the knock on the door, he thought the Marquis and Vice Commander had returned. With his clothes draped around him, and with a lantern in hand, he went to open the door with a smile on his face. But it was empty on the other side of the door. "A poltergeist?" the young servant boy blurted in a soft voice and poked his head out, but he did not see anyone to his left and right, so he quickly shrank back and trotted back to his room with his outer garment wrapped tightly around him. The corridor was dark, with no lit lanterns. Shen Zichuan's footsteps were in such disarray that he almost tripped Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie pressed Shen Zichuan up against the door panel and pulled off the ribbon, which Shen Zichuan had used to tie up his hair, as they kissed. The kisses left Shen Zichuan gasping for breath. He reached out both hands behind his back and felt around in search of the door lock. No key. Xiao Qie lifted Shen Zichuan slightly. His eyes pressed in close before him, and he looked greedily at Shen Zichuan. Can't enter. Shen Zichuan's heels slid down along the back of Xiao Qie's waist, but then he raised his hand and pressed his palm against Xiao Qie's approaching chin to stop it in place. He breathed out a double entendre, his breath hot. If you can't enter, then you can't enter. Xiao Qie pinched Shen Zichuan's mouth open and lowered his head to take in that sliding tongue. All of last night's exhaustion from the rushed journey seemed to have been swept away clean. Shen Zichuan swallowed the saliva and listened to the creaking of the door panel from the bump. He wanted to ease that jarring sound, so he pulled Xiao Qie closer until the latter was right on him without the slightest gap between them. Let's build a home. Grinding against soft flesh, Xiao Qie's throat tightened as he said with a sigh that had escaped. Here. Or anywhere else. Shen Zichuan was sweating as he raised his head with misty eyes blurred by tears. He did not make a sound. He had not done it for a very long time, and he was being so stimulated tonight that he was trembling slightly. Just a few times, and it was all about to come out. He clenched the clothes on Xiao Qie's shoulder, creasing it as his chest heaved violently. It was only when he calmed a little after a while that he said under his breath, "No. Can't." Into the room, but Xiao Qie took this "no" as a reply to his earlier question and abruptly straightened his back, almost causing Shen Zichuan to cry out involuntarily. Why can't Erlang do it? Xiao Qie held Shen Zichuan firmly in his arms and pinched the latter's face to correct its position. Then he said, ruthlessly and wickedly, Erlang can do anything. Shen Zichuan's words were cut off by Xiao Qie's kiss. The corners of his eyes quickly reddened, and even his half-exposed neck had gone red. He opened his mouth several times in an attempt to answer in between the kisses, but Xiao Qie would not give him the chance. All he could do was to let other kinds of sounds loose. Sweat drenched through his clothes, and Shen Zichuan gradually found it hard to breathe. His forehead pressed against Xiao Qie's chest as the waves of ecstasy crashing over him made him dizzy. It was not even an hour, and he had already surrendered twice. Xiao Qie was done taking his bath only after Shen Zichuan fell asleep. Seeing the first glimmer of dawn outside the window, he did not take a rest but instead drank a cup of strong tea and crouched by the bedside to watch Shen Zichuan sleep soundly. He still fell asleep after all. Xiao Qie raised his hand to caress Shen Zichuan's cheek. Once he returned to Li Bei, he had to invite the venerable Igue over. Having turned it over in his mind from different angles after the episodes, his conclusion was that the frequent recurrence of Shen Zichuan's illnesses, whether it was the cold or the epidemic disease, definitely had something to do with that medicine. Too thin. Xiao Qie gazed at Shen Zichuan and thought in the silence that reigned. Although he had also previously found Shen Zichuan thin back in Kudu, it was still much better than now. Shen Zichuan's bout of illness after Qi Hualian's death came and went quickly, but he had still yet to be fed back to health. There was nothing the entire journey here. Xiao Qie held him, watched him, protecting his growing reliance on him every way he could. Shen Wei and Bai Cha did not matter. Xiao Qie lowered his head and pressed up against Shen Zichuan's cheek as he stared, with deep hostility, at the sunlight which was attempting to cloak Shen Zichuan. Shen Lanzhao was his, Xiao Suan's. When Xiao Qie spurred his horse out of the city, Zhou Gui and Kong Ling saw him off. Reining in the reins, he said, I will return in 3 days, regardless of success or failure. The Imperial Army stationed here will stay put for the time being. The instant they detect Lei Jingzhe's trail, send someone to inform me post-haste. Although Tsizhou's city walls are old and worn out, you cannot simply just let it be and brush it aside. Lanzhou will explain the specific arrangements for reinforcements to both of you later. Rest assured, your lordship, Zhou Gui said. All our men in Tsizhou will go along with the vice-commander's arrangements. As for matters relating to the reconstruction of Tsizhou's garrison troops, Xiao Qie paused for a moment and said, I won't concern myself with it. That will be military affairs Lanzhou will be deliberating over with both of you. The Imperial Army is only standing in as the authority on patrols. I can't overstep authority to handle it. So if there are any issues, please discuss them over with Lanzhou. I'm not at liberty to decide. Kong Ling felt a warm buzz in his heart before it went cold again. They were originally worried that Xiao Qie would use the patrols he was standing in for as an excuse to interfere with the reconstruction of the Tsizhou's garrison troops. So he was relieved to hear him say so, but following right after, worries overtook him again. Xiao Qie did not want Tsizhou's military power. He would not accept Tsizhou's remuneration, nor would he take Tsizhou's grains. Then why did he go to the trouble of running all over to duke it out with Lei Jingzhe? He might as well head north and return home to live a free and unfettered life. Kong Ling deliberated over his words, but before he could speak, he heard Xiao Qie continue, Since I've agreed to suppress the bandits for both gentlemen, I'll not renege on my promise. Your Excellency Zhou is willing to risk his head to let the Imperial Army pass through Tsizhou. I naturally have to reciprocate this friendly sentiment. Moreover, the Imperial Army's food supply these few days is being borne by the common folks of Tsizhou. We have eaten your rice, so we will surely fight the battles. Zhou Gui bowed to him in farewell and said, Then we shall wait here for your lordship to return in triumph. There are a few more matters I'll just tell both of you at the same time. Xiao Qie's horse took a few steps around as he looked at Zhou Gui and Kong Ling and said, I do not have the intention to take a concubine in this life. Now that I'm temporarily residing at your Excellency Zhou's residence, there's no need to send any more people to the courtyard. Man or woman, I don't want any of them. Moreover, we are currently bogged down with work. I don't have the spare energy to beat around the bush with you both. So I'm throwing this out here today to make it clear to both of you. Kong Ling knew he was referring to the incident the last time, and he could not help but look embarrassed, stuck in a predicament where it would be inappropriate for him to smile or answer. Lanzhou has lived in Zhongbua for a long time, and it's inevitable that there will be someone bringing up old affairs. But, Shen Zichuan Xiao Qie raised the horsewhip and pointed in the direction of Kudu, is the student of Qi Huilian, the grand mentor of the crown prince in the Eastern Palace, the last disciple of Ji Gang of Duanzhou, the former northern judge cum vice-commander of the imperial bodyguards, and the head of household of my Xiao Suan's future residence. He has nothing to do with any other names. This time, even Zhou Gui did not know how to answer. He was not a person who would fob others off or give others the runaround to begin with, and Xiao Qie's words had rendered him dumbstruck. His mouth opened and closed as he said, Xiao Qie turned his horse around and rode away with his gerfalcon in tow. It was a long time before Zhou Gui returned to his senses. Clutching his sleeves, he asked Kong Ling, What did his lordship mean by this? Then the Prince of Libei. He has already laid out his cards on the table this clearly. He doesn't give a hoot about the troops in Tsizhou. But don't mention Shen Wei. Kong Ling calmly wiped his sweat and said, And don't bring up Bai Cha again. Chapter 113, Reunion. Chapter 113. Reunion. Ding Tao sat cross-legged on the veranda, moving aside the fruits on the silver plate as he counted them over and over again. He stood guard here, preventing anyone from coming near. It was getting late, with a few rays of the evening sun still adorning the courtyard walls as bits and pieces of the setting sun peeked through the leaves of the Chinese scholar trees. Shen Zichuan had just awoken. He had slept for too long and too soundly, so his back and waist were sore and aching. He felt exceptionally tired. He opened the door, blanking out for a moment when he saw Ding Tao. Ding Tao scratched his cheek, feeling uncomfortable with the way Shen Zichuan was staring at him. He put the hand that was still grasping the fruit behind his back and asked with apprehension, "Young master, dinner?" Shen Zichuan held onto the door and stood there for a little while, before asking in a hoarse voice, "What time is it?" "It's the hour of you." Ding Tao was surprisingly aware today, and he quickly followed up with, "Young master has slept for the entire day. Master left the city at the hour of Mao Tu earlier. His Excellency Zhou and Mr. Tringfeng went to send him off together." The corners of Shen Zichuan's eyes were still a little red, and under the lingering reddish-orange glow of the evening sun, he looked as if he was drunk. He was pale to begin with, and Ding Tao found the way he looked when he lowered his eyes to slip on his shoes really handsome. Still no word from Jueshi? Shen Zichuan went down the steps, but he was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he stood under the Chinese scholar tree and tilted his head up slightly to look at the sky as he slowly recovered from the lingering effects of last night's exertion. "No." Ding Tao followed behind Shen Zichuan. Seeing as Shen Zichuan did not look back, he seized the opportunity to hastily stuff the other uneaten half of his fruit into his mouth and gobbled it down ravenously. Shen Zichuan did not see any sign of Meng, and knew that Xiao Qie had brought it along with him. He turned back, startling Ding Tao so much that the latter choked and coughed. Shen Zichuan paused for a moment, then said, "No one is going to snatch it away from you. Take your time." Ding Tao was choking so much his eyes teared up. As he waved his hand, he tugged at the front of his clothes and said with difficulty, "Why, young master, cough. Are we going to look for His Excellency Zhou?" His Excellency and Mr. Tringfeng had taken their dinner in the front hall and are presently discussing matters. Shen Zichuan nodded and said, "Let's go." Zhou Gui had just finished his meal. At present, he was having a discussion in the study with Kong Ling and the various Cizhou officials of differing rank. When he heard that Shen Zichuan had come, he immediately got up and dismissed the others. "His lordship has told us that the vice-commander is feeling unwell today, so we thought that we would only be able to discuss military affairs tomorrow. We didn't expect the vice-commander to come over today still." Kong Ling showed Shen Zichuan a seat, then sat down after him so that he would not feel awkward. He faced them slightly and continued, "Although it's still the 6th month, the trees we have planted in the residence are all tall, lush trees. It's often cold at night. The vice-commander is used to Kudu after staying there year in year out. Now that you're here, you have to take care of your health." Shen Zichuan took a sip of tea to moisten his throat, easing up the dryness and hoarseness a little until it was not as obvious. Only then he said, "Mr. Tringfeng is right. Mr. said that we would be able to discuss military affairs tomorrow. Have both of you already drawn up a charter today? Ever since the vice-commander agreed on a treaty of alliance with us, I have gathered the advisors along with the various ranking officials in Cizhou over these few days to draft up a simple copy." With a hand on his knee, Zhou Gui watched as Kong Ling got up to hand a book to Shen Zichuan. He continued, "These are all tentative. We will still need the vice-commander's approval for the specifics. Take a look. If there's anything inappropriate, we can lay it all out for further discussion tonight." Although he said that they were waiting for Shen Zichuan's approval, he also said they could lay it all out for further discussion. This meant that most of the content within this book was actually already finalized. Such was the awkward situation in which Shen Zichuan had found himself in right now. He had the money, but no other real powers on hand to speak of. Xiao Qie's attitude was the key to the fact that he could even be at the discussion table with these two. Zhou Gui could thank him, or even hold him in high esteem, but he would not hand over Cizhou's policy-making power to him. Because what they had agreed upon was a treaty of alliance, not a pledge of allegiance. Shen Zichuan read the book amidst the silence in the study. Only Ding Tao was on the outside, teasing his sparrow. There were no servants walking about to disturb them. As Kong Ling drank his tea, a sudden uneasiness overtook him. He maintained his composure as he studied Shen Zichuan's expression, but he could not discern any sentiments on Shen Zichuan's face. He then looked at Zhou Gui, who was already letting his expression betray his urgency. He could not help but think to himself, this Shen Zichuan was still young, yet he was an extremely deep and shrewd one. After spending several days together, Kong Ling still could not tell whether he was a willing party or not. There was no way they could find an appropriate way to deal with him. So the drafting of this book was also meant to sound out his intention as well. It was only when the sky had slightly darkened that Shen Zichuan closed the book. He rubbed his fingertips against the teacup without saying a word. Kong Ling was the advisor, so when they were engaged in a serious discussion of official affairs in the study, he could not overstep his authority and bypass Zhou Gui. At the same time Zhou Gui got him to light the lamps. He turned slightly to his side to face Shen Zichuan and deliberated over his words. So what does the Vice Commander His Excellency think? Your Excellency has also recorded the price fluctuations of the daily necessities of fuel, rice, oil, and salt in Xizhou over the past few years in the book, and the accounts are all clear enough that there won't be a problem estimating next year's approximate expenditure. I've also seen that Your Excellency has also written about the proportion of military pay and provisions to be allocated for the garrison troops in the future. Your Excellency has worked day and night tirelessly, taking all the various aspects into consideration. Shen Zichuan said with a smile. Zhou Gui let out a light sigh of relief. He did not know why he was so strung up. Upon hearing Shen Zichuan, he then replied, This book is not something I alone can write. I still have Qingfeng and my fellow officials to thank for this. Then, shall we begin to discuss the defenses of the city walls? Shen Zichuan's fingertips paused in place. He said, There's no rush. I have some questions. To which Zhou Gui hurriedly prompted, Please go on. Going by Your Excellency's estimation of Xizhou's next year approximate expenditures, there is also a remuneration of 16,000 Dan 3 of grains for the 20,000 Imperial Army troops other than the rebuilt garrison troops. The total sum for both armies is 110,000 Dan of grains. Shen Zichuan pondered it over. This is allocated according to the amount of bumper harvest in Xizhou last year, and it's also what had been saved up for the original number of people in Xizhou at present. But I can see that Your Excellency still has a remaining 10,000 Dan of grains left unmarked. That's right, Zhou Gui answered. Although Shao Chia said he did not want any remuneration, they could not really not give any for real. This 16,000 Dan of grains was only enough to last the 20,000 Imperial Army troops 2.5 months. This was more than the monthly amount they allocated to the 20,000 Xizhou garrison troop. Although they were unable to supply a year worth of grains, they had already done their best. Zhou Gui was worried that Shen Zichuan found it too little, so he said with sincerity, It is with the hope that the Vice Commander and his Lordship can understand that I showed Xizhou's accounts to the Vice Commander today. Because of the instability in Dazhou this year, our grains from last year were all successively allocated to Libei and Mount Luo. This is something that we could not have foreseen. We had the Jueshi's granaries to assume responsibility for the supply of military provisions in the past years, but now this responsibility has been split between the two prefectures of Xizhou and Huaizhou. I don't know about Huaizhou, but our Xizhou really had to skimp and save in order to be able to ship out the grains. It's not that I'm complaining to the Vice Commander, but to tell you the truth, we are gritting our teeth as we shoulder the burden of the temporary supply of grains from Xizhou to His Lordship's 20,000 Imperial Army. But even then, we will only be able to hang on for a couple of months. Fortunately, it's nearing the autumn harvest, and we will be able to make it till then after counting the days. That's why we are still not at the stage where we are at the end of our rope. I would like to ask the Vice Commander to intercede with His Lordship on behalf of Xizhou regarding this 16,000 Dan of grain. It's not that we want to go back on our words by shifting it to next year, but there is really too much to consider. There was already an imprint of a frown permanently etched between Zhou Gui's eyebrows given how he was always knitting his brows in worry. He rose to his feet and paced for a few steps in the open space before he said to Shinzichuan, "Cizhou is a place where the people's livelihood is at the mercy of the elements. But who could say if heaven would still be willing to grant us food next year? Seeing as Dazhou has already come to this stage, I fear that once war arises next year, the fertile farmlands that Cizhou had just cultivated would be destroyed in just a moment. When the time comes, even the common folks in the city will not be able to eat their fill. And we won't be able to afford to provide for the garrison troops even if we established one. We kept a surplus of military grains not only to keep them as emergency life-saving food relief, but also as preparation for the Libe armored cavalry. Vice Commander, it's not that we are not willing to take out big sums of money for his lordship to use, but the Libe armored cavalry is the first line of defense guarding against the Biancha Hanshi tribe. It's a fact that they are more important than the 20,000 Imperial Army troop. Half of the reason why Cizhou is willing to sign a treaty of alliance with both of you is that I was thoroughly heartbroken and disillusioned by the Wei clan's military provision case. It's also because his lordship is the second young master of the Shao clan that dispelled many of my misgivings. I did this favor not just for both of you, but also for the hereditary prince. Although the vice commander has promised that we can still continue to use the Northeast Provisions bridle path, I still have to leave myself a way out. After all, Jueshi is Dazhou's granary. To the various clans, that is a place of strategic importance. The vice commander covets it, and the Empress Dowager, even more so. Everything I have just said to the vice commander is heartfelt words from the bottom of my heart." Zhou Gui finally paused. He slowly bowed to Shun Zichuan and continued, "No one has it easy trying to make a living in turbulent times. I'm the prefectural prefect of Cizhou, and to me, Cizhou's safety is of utmost importance and priority. His lordship and the vice commander have helped Cizhou out of a spot this time, and I will not hesitate to go through fire and water for both of you. If Cizhou still has a bumper harvest this year, then we can still add on to this 16,000 dan of grains next year. But Cizhou really can't supply the Imperial Army in the same way we are supplying to the Libe armored cavalry. I'll be frank with you. If Biancha were to invade us in autumn, or if Libe is hard-pressed for grains next year in spring, then Cizhou will allocate the grains to Libe armored cavalry first before we allocate it to the Imperial Army." The candle flames in the study were not very bright. Zhou Gui lived frugally, eating and dressing simply. Other than the time he had to entertain Shin Zichuan and Xiao Qie, his entire family would usually have common dishes for their meals. They even cooked tree barks during the years they were hit with disasters. Cizhou currently seemed to be the most prosperous and well-off place in Zhongbua, but in truth it was still in shambles compared to the other lands. His willingness to take out the grains was a great load of pressure on his shoulders. Zhou Gui's suggestion that they request the aid of the Libe armored cavalry the first time Xiao Qie left the city was not made on the spur of the moment. It was an idea that was already deeply ingrained in his mind. The defeat of Zhongbua's troops had been said countless times, both implied and stated, but outsiders would never experience and share the same pain as those who had been through it. Zhou Gui even developed post-traumatic symptoms because of the troop defeat case. If he so much heard a whistle at night, he would toss and turn all night in a constant state of anxiety. The defeat of the Chashu River along the boundary was really too tragic. Massacre, massacre. This word made its way back to Kudu from Duanzhou. Everyone was reading this word aloud back then. But to Kudu, bloodbath was merely a smudge of ink on the memorial. To Zhongbua, however, the destruction of properties, loss of lives, and ruin of families were all too real. It was all because of the Libe armored cavalry that Cizhou had a narrow escape. In the eyes of Zhou Gui and everyone in Cizhou, the Libe armored cavalry was far more important than the imperial army. Xiao Jiming led his godly troops down to save them, and River of Ice armored cavalry was thus the death exemption token in the face of the Biancha cavalry at the two borders to Dazhou's north and east. Lei Jingzhe dared to angle for Cizhou, but he did not have the intent to settle down for long. He was even ready just to rob Cizhou's grains and leave to seek credit right away from Kudu. What he feared was precisely Xiao Jiming's deployment of his troops south again. Xiao Jiming suffered a loss and was wounded in the military provisions case. But none of them had seen it with their own eyes. Those who were waiting for him did not dare to believe it, while those who feared him did not dare to bet on it. If the old-school senior officials headed by Hai Liangyi feared Xiao Fangxiu, then the one those juniors down the ranks feared more was Xiao Jiming. Silence reigned in the study. The candle light flickered. Shen Zichuan felt his back and waist aching. There were still traces of Xiao Qie's bites on his collarbone, which had been covered up by his collar. Strangely enough, even at such a serious and solemn moment, he remembered Xiao Qie's sweat-drenched face, Xiao Qie's strong arms, and Xiao Qie's kisses that wandered around his neck as Xiao Qie gasped for breath. He remembered everything about Xiao Qie. The only thing he could not think of was a way in which Xiao Qie was inferior to Xiao Jiming. Shen Zichuan was silent for only a few moments, and his mind wandered for only a fleeting instant. He said, "I understand all that Your Excellency has said. We will return the exact same amount of the grains that Suen and I have temporarily borrowed after our arrival here next year." The color promptly drained from Zhou Gui's face. He tried to explain, "Vice Commander, that's not what The issue I wanted to discuss with Your Excellency is not that the grains you are allocating to the Imperial Army are too little, but that it's too much." Shen Zichuan motioned for Zhou Gui to sit and lay it out with clear reasoning. "The fact that Cizhou is willing to allocate so much grains for the Imperial Army's use is proof enough of your sincerity. But as we mentioned at the beginning, the Imperial Army will only use the grains from Cizhou at this point in time. The Imperial Army has a supply channel for future military provisions, so it doesn't need to draw from Cizhou's granary." Zhou Gui felt foolish and did not dare to interject arbitrarily, so he looked at Kong Ling and said, "Qingfeng is the one who supervised the drafting of the book, so there are some matters that he understands better than I do." Qingfeng explained to the vice commander. Holding on to the back of the chair for support, Kong Ling rose to his feet. Instead of explaining, he asked, "The vice commander is so certain that the Imperial Army would not lack grains in the future, and you also said that the Northeast Provisions bridle path can still be used as usual. We really can't think of any countermeasure that would allow us to do this. Would the vice commander be so kind as to explain to us? Otherwise, we will still have to ask the Imperial Army to accept this batch of grains." Shen Zichuan gently stirred the tea in the teacup with the lid and said, "Before this, I still want to ask both of you if Cizhou is going to live off the land in the future." Kong Ling replied, "Cizhou is limited by its geographical position. If not, then how can we survive? What I see is the exact opposite of Mr." Shen Zichuan put down the teacup and said, "It's true that Cizhou was initially in a non-ideal position. There's Libe to the north and Chazhou to the south. It is obstructed by Dunzhou and Duanzhou to the east and restricted by Danqing to the west. It doesn't dare to move as it pleases, and it can't move at will either. But that was when Cizhou was still subordinated to Kudu. You are now on good terms with Libe. Danqing can no longer rely on Kudu's power and influence to force Cizhou to carry out orders. Meanwhile, Dunzhou has been occupied by the bandits, and a purge is imminent. With these, the three-sided walls enclosing Cizhou have already collapsed. The remaining Chazhou is not an obstacle, but an opportunity." For Zhou Gui wanted to get up again. His robe had already gone all creased from his kneading of it. He asked cautiously, "You mean, Chazhou lies along the waterway that can lead right to Hezhou?" After the defeat of the troops, The merchants in Huzhou who had come from all over took advantage of the opportunity to peddle the grains at exorbitant prices in Zhongbua, earning quick and huge profits from bandits of all sizes. It would be truly a shame if this route is only used to make someone else rich. But bandits are also currently in power in Chazhou. What's more, Chazhou has relations with the Yan clan of Huzhou. They won't let Art Sizhou use the route to do business without good cause. Kong Ling was growing anxious as he spoke. Besides, what can we sell? Compared to Huzhou, Sizhou is a remote hinterland. Grains, Shen Zichuan said. The moment he said that, Zhou Gui jerked to his feet and exclaimed, "No! Isn't that the same as those conscienceless thieves who conspire with the Jueshi officials and merchants to resell public grains for profit?" "Your Excellency, please calm down." The expression in Shen Zichuan's eyes was too calm, so calm that Zhou Gui could not help but sit back down. He said, "The reason why there are people in Jueshi and Huzhou reselling grains at exorbitant prices is that there is a shortage of grains in the various lands of Zhongbua, of which Chazhou is the worst hit. In Kudu, 1 tael of silver can buy you 2 dan of grains, while the same tael of silver in Jueshi can buy you 1 dan and 5 do 5 of grains. But in Chazhou, 1 tael of silver can buy you only 2 do of grains. The money the bandits in Chazhou have on hand is all fleeced from the remaining commoners in Chazhou. Because of this, the law-abiding citizens registered on the household register cannot survive, and consequently, they are forced to take risks out of desperation. The number of people who are reduced to being bandits will only increase with time. Your Excellency, this is also the fundamental reason why Lei Changming, that is, Lei Jingzhe, is able to rapidly expand his troops to this number within 6 months. So, if Sizhou is willing to sell grains to Chazhou at a fair price slightly higher than Kudu, it would be helping Chazhou instead. But, Kong Ling frowned slightly, if we sell the grains to Chazhou, then there will no doubt be a shortage in the granary. If we only have silver in our hands, then won't we be in the same plight as Chazhou is in now? When the time comes, the conscienceless grain merchants in Jueshi and Huzhou go even further in trying to fleece money from us. Huzhou is far away. Even if Sizhou wants to do business with it, there's no hurry to do so in these 1 or 2 years. I had some understanding of Huaizhou when I left Kudu. Huaizhou contributed half the effort in the preparation of the military provision this time, and they have an abundance of grains in their granary. Diqing, which is on the outskirts of Kudu, lies to the southwest of Huaizhou, and it leads directly to Jueshi's harbor too. Huaizhou just happens to lack money if it wants to conduct businesses through Diqing. Sizhou can first sell the grains to Chazhou, then buy it back from Huaizhou at a price lower than Chazhou. The surplus silver can be used as a subsidy for other areas, while the granary can maintain its abundance of grains at all times. This can give the Libei armored cavalry, or Sizhou, some leeway at the crucial moment. The imperial bodyguards had an assignment to keep track and record, which is to take detailed records of the commodity prices in the streets and alleys. When Shen Zichuan was in office as the northern judge, he was in charge of the Imperial Bodyguard's military craftsmen and could leaf through the Imperial Bodyguard's annual records of the various areas. Gu Qingqing initially wanted to have it copied down, but Shen Zichuan spent the entire night memorizing it all down. He had been prematurely on guard against the unknown future and had not been willing to put all the important stuff down on paper that easily. As it turned out, he did right. They left Kudu in such haste that they had no time to bring anything else along. But all the records, files, and old registries and books he had read before went with him when he left. Zhou Gui was lost in thought. He contemplated it over and over again, then said, "If Huaizhou isn't willing, it's feasible. Luoxia Pass lies to the east of Huaizhou. It can transfer out local specialties from the frontiers of Libei, and it's a linear route to have them transported to the harbor." The more Kong Ling thought, the more excited he became. He could not help but walk a few rounds, then he slapped his thighs and said, "That's right. We should have done it a long time ago. If Tizhou still doesn't know how to adapt to the circumstances, then won't it still be trapped in the same cage as before? This is workable. Shen Zichuan never answered the question of how he would keep the Northeast Provisions bridle path in use, but Kong Ling was already too preoccupied to bother about it. In the candlelight, he seemed to see a new lease of life for Tizhou. From what had happened with Lei Changming, he had thought Shen Zichuan to be a man who would stoop to deception and trickery. But now, he had forgotten all about it. He wanted to grab hold of Shen Zichuan to say his proper thanks, but then, when he extended his hand, he remembered Xiao Qia, and so he hurriedly retracted them and said, "If we do this, then even if we have an oversurplus of grains in the next few years, we would not have to fear it growing mold in the granary. Then, let's discuss the garrison troops," Zhou Gui said from across the table. "And the defenses of the city walls." Shen Zichuan drank his hot tea. He had yet to open his mouth when he saw Ding Tao, who had been outside the study, poked his head in and waved his hand vigorously at him. "What's the matter?" Shen Zichuan rose to his feet and walked over to the door. Ding Tao had gone out earlier, and he had been running until his entire head and face were drenched in sweat. He opened his mouth and said, young master, they're here." Zhou Gui and Kong Ling came closer too. One moment, they saw a very worked-up Ding Tao. The next moment, he suddenly closed both eyes and burst out crying. As if sensing something, Shen Zichuan walked out of the door in a daze. "Sure enough," Ding Tao said as he choked with sobs, "young master, the brothers are back. Qiao Tianya is back too." And that Shen Zichuan was already taking large strides out to the courtyard. It was already completely dark outside, and he was still holding the teacup in his hand. As he walked, the tea spilled and scalded his fingers until they were slightly red, but he did not seem to notice. He had completely forgotten about it. He pressed on and walked outside the residence. It was a short journey, but he was sweating all over. There were several carriages for the transportation of goods parked outside the residence, and a few tall figures were standing all spread out under the lanterns. The shorter one, still in his cloak, was turned sideways as he stood while resting beside the carriage. Shen Zichuan's chest heaved. The rims of his eyes were already reddened, but he forcibly held himself back, unwilling to lay his emotions bare here. Ji Gang turned around for a look on hearing the movements and saw Shen Zichuan. He forgot all about the stone steps before him and nearly tripped. He revealed a headful of disheveled white hair and opened and closed his lips. Before he had even called out the name, he was already in tears. Chuan, Ji Gang was just like a child with white hair. Even as he was miffed with himself for being inarticulate, he was also anxiously beckoning to him. Shen Zichuan descended the stairs in 2 steps and stepped forth to support Ji Gang by the arm. Ji Gang turned his hands around to grab hold of Shen Zichuan's arms instead and sized him up and down. In this life, he was first an imperial bodyguard in Kudu and then a blacksmith in Duanzhou. Later, a great catastrophe befell him, and he lost both of his wife and son to the Grim Reaper. Even so, he would still push himself to put on a tough act before others. But now, on seeing Shen Zichuan, he could not control the tears from gushing from his eyes. Chuan or Ji Gang wiped his tears with his rough fingers and looked at Shen Zichuan over and over again. All the thousands of words he had to say became a single line of, "As long as you're fine." He was travel-worn, and he had thinned down quite a bit. Qi Hualien was dead, and he had been feeling apologetic about it. At the same time, he feared Shen Zichuan would have a rough time after leaving Kudu, and so he had traveled at top speed the entire journey, unable to eat and sleep well. All those suffering piled up over his already hunched back. He had long ceased to be the Ji Gang who was renowned in the world. But this emaciated body of his was still willing to shelter and shield Shen Zichuan from the elements. For this sun, he could travel thousands upon thousands of li, and he could fight the great heroes of the world. He really had nothing else to ask for, He only wanted to see Shen Zichuan alive and well. Why have you become so thin? Ji Gang could barely control himself from saying. Shifu. Shen Zichuan's voice trembled. Why has Shifu lost so much weight? I'm too old to bear any torment. Ji Gang hastily wiped his tears and said happily, I'm all good now that I've seen you. Xiao Tianya brushed the shattered teacup aside and kneeled on one knee. With the intent to ease the poignant moment, he said with a smile, although it was a few extra months' worth of journey, this mission was smoothly accomplished. Master, how about a reward of a meal and wine? Shifu, let's take a seat before we talk. The courtyard that was not big to begin with was all filled with people. Kong Ling told the kitchen to cook up some hot dishes and set up a table in the courtyard, whereupon he used, on horseback, 6 to treat the newly arrived imperial bodyguards and Li Bei guards to a dinner. Xiao Tianya chased after Ding Tao's plump sparrow with a pair of chopsticks and said, We've all gone thin from the running, but you fed it until it's all fat. Are you planning to make it into a dish for us to enjoy with wine? Ding Tao was initially happy. But on hearing him, he scooped up the sparrow and said sharply, No! Gu Jin was starving. Even in the intervals when he was busy shoving rice into his mouth, he did not forget to extend his chopsticks and hit Xiao Tianya's chopsticks back. He said in a muffled voice, You need a spanking or something? Why do you have to insist on bullying a kid? Your share of the food during the journey was never deducted. Chen Yang said as he sat and drank the wine. So why are you still this hungry? Brother Gu gave out all his food to the children begging along the way. It was then Fei Xing socialized with them. He knew that everyone would be fellow comrades in the future, so he chose his words and picked the nice things to say. Brother Gu is quite the chivalrous one to dig out a good amount of copper coins to buy steamed buns for them. Help others in an emergency, but not if they are in constant poverty, Chen Yang said earnestly with good intentions. You really have to change that habit of yours where you go all soft-hearted when you see others weep. There's a shortage of food everywhere now. I'm not telling you to refrain from doing kind deeds, but you really need to know your limit. You spent all your money? Ding Lai sprawled over the side of the table and said, Jinji, didn't you say the last time that you would hand it over to me? I'll save it all up for you to marry a wife. I've long said to leave it with me. I remember it very clearly. As he spoke, he fished out his little book. It's still written here that you drank wine and borrowed 3 copper coins from me during the spring festival 3 years ago. Of course, I don't care about this bit of money. I don't care. Really, gee, I'm just... Gu Jin ate to his heart's content. He stuffed the cotton he always brought along with him into his right ear, then turned to the left and said, Wine from back home? Give me a jar. Only 3 cups. Xiao Tianya had already stopped eating earlier. He said, You have to go with me to report to my master in a moment. Look at you drinking yourself drunk. Are you forgetting how his lordship punished you the last time? At this time, I'd advise you to act with prudence. He was usually laughing and joking. But he was the vice-commander of the Imperial bodyguard in the past, and he really gave off an imposing air when he played the part now. His tone was mild, but his words were not as pleasant to the ears. Gu Jin frowned in irritation, but he still nodded his head and said, It's just a craving. I haven't had a drink for months. Gradually, Ding Tao stopped chattering. He was the youngest among these people, and they usually saw and treated him as a younger brother. None of the elder brothers had ever been stingy in buying him candy. As such, he was not afraid of anyone and would dare to get close with everyone. He was born a discerning person, one who was particularly sensitive to the exchange of emotions between people. He could sense that the various older brothers did not seem to be as relaxed as they looked on the surface, so he held his little sparrow in both hands and behaved himself while he sat at the side, making neither noise nor fuss. When they were almost done with their meals, Kong Ling arranged for some people to clear out the courtyard so that the guests who had been on the road all this while could rest. As it was already midnight, Shen Zichuan sent Ding Tao to lead Ji Gang away for a rest. The few at the head all had matters to report, and so they stood in successive order on the veranda and prepared to take turns to enter. Come on in all at once and take a seat. We can discuss it together if there's something you need to say. After all of them had entered, Shen Zichuan sat in the main seat and asked Chen Yang first, "Did the preparation of the military provisions go smoothly?" Chen Yang sat upright and organized his choice of words for a moment before he said, "No. As young master had expected before I left, the officials of Huaizhou tried every means and way to stonewall and stall the preparations. The war in Libei was intense at that time, and master's 2 days deadline was just around the corner. I was burning with anxiety. It was a guard of Luoxia Pass, His Excellency Jiang, who stepped forth to vouch for me that Huaizhou was finally willing to release the grains. Fortunately, we made it in time for the deadline, and the provisions' bridle path leads right to Libei, so the military affairs were not held up." At this point, he fell silent for a moment before he continued, "I saw the hereditary prince back in Libei. He's severely injured. When he heard that master was caught in a heavy siege back in Kudu, he wanted to lead the troops over to receive him. Unfortunately, his lordship the prince overruled him." Shen Zichuan did not ask for further details. Instead, he turned to Gu Jin and said, "You came to Cizhou to transfer grains back then. Zhougui isn't that hard to deal with compared to the Huaizhou prefectural prefect. So why are you still looking troubled now?" Gu Jin looked somewhat taken aback to be called. Everyone present could notice his absent-mindedness. Shen Zichuan looked at him. Gu Jin replied, "It's true that I did not encounter any difficulties when I came to Cizhou to supervise the preparation of military provisions. I went along with the troops to deliver it to the front line well in advance, and I even saw his lordship the prince at the eastern range of Hongyan Mountains." He did not speak quickly, and when he stopped, he hesitated for a very long time. "I heard that master had left Kudu, so I've been waiting for him to return home. It was when I saw Chen Yang in the army later that I knew master had stopped over in Cizhou. And so I rushed over. Libei was just to the north of Cizhou. By all reasoning, they should have been faster than Qiao Tianya." Shen Zichuan tapped his fingertips lightly on the tabletop. He skipped over it and said to Qiao Tianya, "How about you? Tell me the details." Qiao Tianya propped up his arm on the chair handle and answered very quickly, "I hurried on my way to search for Shifu and teacher on master's order. I traced the trail in the inner chamber of the Shui's residence and discovered that Shui Xiuzhua had moved Shifu over to the Donglong's broker house, but there was no trace of Mr. We were a step late, and we could not get out of the city gate, so we could only go into hiding in Kudu." As he spoke, he looked at Fei Xing. It just happened that he was also leading his men to hide from the noble clan's searches. "We tried every means possible to get out of the city, but Han Qing had the city so tightly guarded that not even a drop of water could get through. We really had nowhere to go, so we hid at his lordship's Plum Blossom residence. As luck would have it, it was in the Plum Blossom residence that I found the layout blueprint of Kudu's public ditches that his lordship had tricked out of the Pan clan. This item was obtained by Xiao Qie from Pan Lin when he had hosted a banquet after being promoted to a nobility rank. At that time, he was prepared to keep it for himself as a contingency measure. But by some unexpected turn of events, it became the key for Qiao Tianya and the rest's escape from Kudu. We crawled our way out from the public ditches. As Fei Xing spoke, he reached a hand out to gesture with his fingers. The public ditches in the various streets are all newly dug. I don't know if this was his lordship's intent, but they are all narrow on the outside and wide inside. There are even candles and field rations stored in the dry spot. Over 50 of us relied on these field rations to circle around the 8 great training divisions for more than 10 days before we finally came out of Kudu at a place near Mount Feng. After we emerged, we realized that there were strictly enforced checks on public roads between Kudu and the 8 cities. So we pawned off the gold, silver, and jade pendants on us and disguised ourselves as traveling merchants. We made a detour from the south of Chuanqing to Chazhou, then hurried from Chazhou over to Cizhou. Xiao Tianya said. When we arrived at Chazhou half a month earlier, we heard that Han Qing had already sent the imperial heir into the palace. But news was sparse after leaving Chazhou, so we lost track of what happened after. As for other details, we'll have to wait for Gu Qingqing's letter. No one disturbed Shun Zichuan as he contemplated it over. He heard the sound of Ding Tao walking on the veranda and waited until Ding Tao walked to the door before he said, "Both of you are tired. So go with Ding Tao and take a rest for tonight." Fei Xing was a discerning man who could take his cues. He was not in a hurry to lay his loyalty bare tonight either, so he rose in one smooth move, took his leave of the master together with Xiao Tianyao, and withdrew out of the room. The candle flame flared a little and flickered for a moment. Gu Jin never lifted his head to utter another sound. He sank in the darkness, with the shadows from the candle flame cast upon the side of his face like two of villains scuffling with one another. Shun Zichuan was surprisingly cool-headed as he said, "Did something happen to both of you in Libei?" Chen Yang lifted a hand to partially cover his face and propped up his elbow on the chair handle. He said, "I've been staying close to the hereditary prince, so nothing really happened to me. It's Gu Jin." Gu Jin undid his clasps in the unbearable silence, took off his upper garment, and turned around, thereby exposing his entire back right before Shun Zichuan. He said, "These matters should have been reported directly to Master, but Master will only be back a few days later. As per Master's instruction back in Kudu, I can report to young Masters first. I arrived at the area where the war was the most intense. His Lordship and Commander-in-Chief Swa are both safe. After the conclusion of the military provisions investigation, I temporarily took up my original position as the vanguard of the reconnaissance squad, dealing with the cavalry of the Hanshi tribe every day. I can't remember which day, but we ran into an ambush when I was leading the squad back from the eastern mountain ranges. That back was already festered. The more severe spots had already been scraped away. Blood could still be seen seeping through the bandaged areas. I was hit by an arrow, but I managed to escape. I initially thought it was someone from the Hanshi tribe, so I led the remaining 200 men and skirted around the grasslands where the Hanshi tribe lurks to make our way back through the Tudalong Banner S7 swamps. But who knew we got ambushed again that very night at Tudalong Banner. Gu Jin pulled up his clothes over him. As he secured the clasps, he said, "Young Master, I was initially a scout. It's because of this pair of eyes and ears that I could be chosen by His Lordship the Prince as a guard. I may not be as good as I was before in all these years I've stayed in Kudu, but after Master's admonition, I no longer dared to be negligent, especially on the battlefield where I tread with a lot more caution. That night, my marching route order was directly issued. I've never discussed it with anyone. Yet we got ambushed both times. So I started to suspect that there's a spy from the Hanshi tribe in the squad. While escaping the second time, I discovered there was snake venom on the arrow. This poison had been smeared on Ding Tao's steel needles in the past. It's something that came from the Hongyan Western Mountain Range. My back was festering pretty badly, and we were being closely pursued through the swamp. Then I was also bitten by some poisonous bugs. I couldn't hold out, and a fever broke out at dawn." At this point, Gu Jin stopped. He spoke dully, and he paused many times as if repeatedly confirming to himself in case he said one word wrong. He knew the implications of his upcoming words. "Our horses all drowned in the swamp. I couldn't walk on any more. The Libei Armored Cavalry's Changzhou camp lies about 10 li or so south of Tudalong Banner. Strangely enough, no one was on patrol that day. I had my trusted junior general head back first, while I remained where I was to wait for reinforcements. But no one came even after I waited from dusk to dawn the next day. I was worried that the spy would make use of this chance to enter Changzhou camp, so I pushed myself to hurry back. I barely escaped by the skin of my teeth back to the camp, but I was stripped of my blade and held in custody. I spent the entire night in the prison shack where the Biantia prisoners of war were detained. On the second day, I was taken to the front tent to be put on trial with the general of Changju camp, Guowei, presiding over it. Gu Jin omitted the details of the trial. He had no wish to recall it either. That was, to him, not physical pain, but a mental collapse of sorts. He continued in a very, very soft voice. They said I was in covert communication with the Hanshi tribe to wipe out the vanguard squad even further east in the Tudalong banner. They stripped me of my rank in the military and wanted me to confess if I had done so on someone else's instructions. I can't confess to something I have never done. I questioned Changju camp why they overlooked both of my consecutive requests for reinforcements, and they claimed that they never received it. According to military law, I would have to undergo a joint trial by 3 generals and have the current commander-in-chief give the go-ahead in person before I can be executed. But Guowei kept insisting that the hereditary prince have yet to recover from his severe injuries, and they had the authority to act on his behalf. If not for Chen Yang arriving in time that day, I would not be standing here before young master now. Shen Zichuan picked out the candle wick with a silver needle, and the flame extinguished. He stared at that candle, which seemed to be shedding tears. In just an instant, countless thoughts had already flashed through his mind. He did not even need to be reminded by Chen Yang and Gu Jin to remember, from the letter of appointment by the Ministry of War, that this Guowei was a person Xiao Jiming had single-handedly promoted. Xiao Qia followed the trail left by Lei Jingzhe and pursued him all the way to the north of the old camping grounds. He dismounted to grab a handful of soil, then looked ahead and slightly narrowed his eyes. Tantai who surveyed the mountain range and said, "They are going to step across Libei's boundary line if they continue on north. They won't dare to head there, so they can only split up and flee. Master, I suspect he is leading us on a wild goose chase. It's too strenuous to keep chasing after them like this." He's indeed doing just that. Xiao Qia loosened his grip. And they are fleeing in small groups. Naturally, we can't catch them all in one fell swoop with a large net. But if we split up now, we will fall into the other party's trap. He's unwilling to fight me head-on because he can't handle the momentum of the Imperial Army. He's worried that his own men will lose focus and morale. They are familiar with this area, so they try every means possible to lure us into splitting up into small groups so that they can break through our defenses one by one. We don't have enough cavalry. Tantai who examined the terrains. This brigand is really too crafty. No rush. Xiao Qia stood up. Meng returned from his patrol and landed on Xiao Qia's shoulder. It stood together with Xiao Qia in the night breeze. The wind rustled the grass, scattering a few strands of willow leaves before him. Of the 5 arms, only fire is the most intense. Once again, Xiao Qia got on his horse. I want a fire so blazing that he has nowhere to hide. Tantai who followed suit and got on his horse. He said, "But there are more lands than trees here. If set aflame, I fear the fire will spread to the grasslands of Libei." Xiao Qia laughed out loud on the horse and said to Tantai who, "I'm not asking you to burn this place down. Go to the big towns and small villages along the way, and get them to put up bulletins announcing that whoever harbors the bandits will be executed with immediate effect. If they inform the Imperial Army, they will be rewarded copper coins per bandit reported. I'll pay as much as they report. And tell them too, Sizhou is about to issue a conscription notice. If they go, 3 meals a day will be provided if nothing else, and informants who have been rewarded cash from the Imperial Army will be given priority. Since Lei Jingzhe doesn't want to be found by us, I'll make him expose himself." Tantai who was hesitant but still said, "But didn't we run out of money? Go report the figures to Lanzhou." Xiao Qia urged his horse on, then reined it in and looked back to say, "This second young master can't even dig out some copper coins?" Tantai who looked embarrassed. Xiao Qie twirled his thumb ring and said with an unfeeling expression, "Oh." Chapter 114. Intensity of Flames. Chapter 114. Intensity of Flames. Having gone hungry for a whole day, Lei Jingzhe squatted beside the pigsty with a bowl in hand. He shoved those hard-earned corn noodles into his mouth and gulped them down. One of his subordinates was also squatting next to him. He was a little imp around the same age as Ding Tao, but as strong as a young ox. He gobbled down his food, just as ravenously as Lei Jingzhe did. A head poked out of the opened kitchen window, and the man used a stir-fry spatula to bang on the pot rim and yelled, "There's some soup broth left. Do you want to drink it? If you do, then get your ass over here quick." "Yes, yes, we want it." Before Li Xiong had even finished swallowing the noodles in his mouth, he was already hurriedly running to the window. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand as he brought his bowl next to the pot. His eyes never once left that clear soup. "You have quite the appetite there." The cook scraped the bottom of the pot. "Tell your older brother to get down to work and find some honest job to do. Then you wouldn't have to starve to this extent. My bro is going to do great things." Li Xiong saw the soup was about to drip from the side of the bowl, so he swiped his fingers around it and put his finger into his mouth to suck it clean. The cook was a strong man in the prime of his life, too. He pulled his apron and wiped the sweat on his forehead. Looking at how strong and good-natured Li Xiong was, he wiped the sweat off for him too while he was at it and said with disapproval, "Your face is as dark as the bottom of a pot, and there's no one at home to take care of you. Hey you there! What are you busy with all day? At least clean this kid up a bit." Lei Jingzhe smiled simply at the cook. He was still chewing the pickled vegetables. Li Xiong trotted over and poured the soup into Lei Jingzhe's bowl, as if he was offering up a treasure. He said solicitously, "Bro, you eat it? Good lad." Lei Jingzhe did not stand on ceremony as he tilted his head back and drank it in one gulp. When he finished drinking, he looked up at the sun above his head. It was so scorching that it was making him sweat. He squeezed his stinging eyes shut, shifted his feet, and cursed under his breath. "Fuck his mother! Fuck his mother!" Li Xiong imitated him. He stood up and shielded Lei Jingzhe from the sunlight. Lei Jingzhe propped up an arm on his knee and asked, "How is it outside?" Li Xiong stretched his neck out and looked around. He answered in a small voice, "They're still searching." Looking irritable, Lei Jingzhe hung his head down, exposing a scorpion tattoo on the back of his neck that was currently dripping with sweat. He had dispersed his people after he had fled from Sizhou, taking only this silly lad he had raised from childhood with him as he sneaked his way into a small town along the public road. He had sat and watched as the imperial army was led on a wild goose chase all over. He was waiting for Xiao Qie to run out of patience so that he would disperse his own soldiers and come after him himself. Who knew Xiao Qie was not impatient in the slightest. Instead, he had set this fire along this road, letting it blaze until all the people were burning with anxiety and panic everywhere. "Bro, the reward money of the Imperial Army's money is so pathetic," Li Xiong said with bewilderment. "It's not enough to even get the brothers some wine. Why are there still so many people going?" "It's precisely because the reward is small." Under Lei Jingzhe's sweat-sheen brows were a pair of extremely bright eyes. "The price he's offering is exactly right. If Xiao Qie set the reward money right at the price of a couple of taels of silvers, then the commoners would not necessarily be willing to be his informants." Zhongbua had been hit with many disasters in recent years. The bandits ruled by force, so the higher the reward, the more it suggested that it was no easy feat to do what was asked of them, that it was a task that might jolly well cost them their lives. But a few copper coins were worthwhile. They only had to inform the Imperial Army upon discovering traces of the bandits, and no one would know about it. It was just a few copper coins, and it was normal to spend it all in an instant. Even if this group of bandits came back to seek vengeance, they would not be able to track anyone down. Then what should we do? Li Xiong drenched in sweat from head to toe. He looked at Lei Jingzhe. Bro, why don't we just fucking go ahead and do it? He only has 20,000 men. Lei Jingzhe was feeling restless too. He could not be clearer about Xiao Qia's intentions. Xiao Qia wanted to force them into making a move out of restlessness so that they would not be able to sit still and continue hiding. But he was extremely clear-headed. He knew that the people he was leading were a motley crew cobbled together from the 2 prefectures in the east. None of them had received formal military training. They would end up battered and defeated the moment they lost their current advantage and faced off the well-equipped imperial army. However, it was not an option to keep hiding either. Lei Jingzhe could hide, but could those rowdy subordinates of his hold it in? Lei Jingzhe was sweating. He stared at the muck under his feet and said, "That person is a little underhand. He won't play a game with me by the rules of benevolence, justice, morality, virtue, and the likes. I don't think he has even set up defenses in the north at all. He just wants to jostle us over. He knows very well that it's Libei in the north, and he's betting that we won't dare to go there." But damn it! Feeling stifled with pent-up frustration, Lei Jingzhe spat. He really did not dare to go. "We'll wait for one more night." Lei Jingzhe suddenly stood up and said, "Go, tell Luer to notify the brothers who are still in the town tonight that we'll leave if the situation doesn't look right. If worst comes to worst, we'll just retreat back to Mount Luo first. I have all the energy to play a war of attrition with Xiao Qia." Xiao Qia was eating a few steamed buns paired with pickled vegetables. He sat on a wooden stake used for tethering horses and watched as the soldiers issued paper slips that could be used to exchange for copper coins to the commoners who came to tip them off. "Master," Tantai, who walked over and said, "he really is something to scatter his people everywhere. How is he going to issue his orders this way? He can't be going around knocking on their doors one by one, can he? As the bandit chief, he naturally has his ways." As Xiao Qia spoke, he scratched Meng, who was perched on his shoulder. The gerfalcons raised in Libei are also able to pass on military intelligence swiftly. "We caught quite a number of them," Tantai Hu said. "What shall we do with them?" Xiao Qia said, "Kill them." Tantai Hu turned to look at that other side, then looked back at Xiao Qia. He said quietly, "But I heard that some of them are gentlemen from respectable families. Kill them all?" Xiao Qia looked at Tantai Hu and said, "Since they went to Mount Luo to join the bandits and submit themselves to Lei Jingzhe's command, they should have expected such a day to come. I'm here to eradicate the bandits. There is no reason for me to show mercy to the enemy forces. Besides, let me ask you, humans are all born with a mouth. If every one of them says that they are from a respectable family, then who do you believe, and who do you not?" Tantai Hu said nothing. Xiao Qia stood up and watched as Meng flew away. He said, "I know you're thinking of the Biancha cavalry. But Lao Hu, benevolence should not be used in the wrong place. You've been in the army for a long time. These are originally words I shouldn't have to make a special point of telling you. Are you not able to figure it out yourself?" Tantai Hu lowered his head and made to kneel. "Remain standing." Xiao Qia patted his shoulder. "You are now a general leading the soldiers, not a squad commander standing guard at the main city gate of Dengzhou. Don't get your position all wrong." Xiao Qia was generous, but he was also quite exacting. The guards around him all knew when to advance and when to retreat. He could even make Qin Yang feel worse than if he had been whipped the last time the latter had sat on the sidelines. However, guards and generals were two different things. Why did Xiao Qia not let Qin Yang lead the troops? There was no doubt that Zhao Hui, the person by Xiao Jiming's side, was a valiant general. Xiao Qia obviously had other considerations in mind. Xiao Qia did not fly into a rage, nor was there a change in his countenance, but Tantai Hu was already looking quite ashamed. None of them could get a handle on Xiao Qia's true moods and emotions, but with just a relaxed tone like this from Xiao Qia, Tantai, who had already begun to reflect on his own shortcomings. Chapter 115, Destiny. Chapter 115. Destiny. Swing after swing of the Imperial Army's blades pressed in towards them. The soil under their feet was already soaking wet from the splashes of blood. A bandit who was still alive was pinned to the ground. He listened to the never-ending screams until even his pants were wet with piss. The back of a blade pressed up against the back of his neck. His nose and mouth were smeared all over with bloodied water, choking him until tears and mucus flowed. He cried in terror, "I don't know. I really don't know." Lei Jingzhe was suspicious by nature, and he was very secretive about his whereabouts when he was in Mount Luo. Other than his trusted aides, no one else knew his exact hiding place. Tantai, who scraped away the bloody mud on the soles of his boots and said, "Since you know nothing, then why are you wasting our time? Drag him away." Both of the bandit's arms were bound behind his back, and the Imperial Army dragged him by the rope to the execution spot. He kicked out both legs, looking at those headless corpses lying on either side of him. The back of the blade that had been pressing against his nape was already turned over, and the sharp edge of the blade made him tremble all over. He watched Tantai, who lifted his blade and suddenly burst out bawling. "Lure, sir. I know where Lure is." Tantai, who asked, "Is this person a trusted aide of Lei Jingzhe?" "Yes, yes, a trusted aide." The bandit's chest heaved as he stared wide-eyed at that blade and said, "Lure is our carrier pigeon. He is the one who passes on all the orders issued by Lei Jingzhe. It was also Lure who sent someone to pass me the message telling me to bring the men to hide out in the west." After having been here for half a night, Tantai, who finally managed to pry out some information. He lifted the man and asked, "Where is this Lure now?" "In Bianshui town." The bandit answered. "The information I received a few days back came from Bianshui town. If you go look for him now, you will definitely find him." Bianshui town was just a few li away, but on second thoughts, Tantai, who felt that it did not bode well. They had searched through that place many times, and in all probability, they had already alerted the enemy. He hurriedly released his grip on the man and strode away to report to Shaoqie. The Imperial Army promptly changed direction and raced to Bianshui town. They set up a heavy siege outside the town, then searched from house to house and detained all the recent arrivals with questionable origins who were not registered in the household register. The bandits were identified one by one, but there were no traces of Lure and Lei Jingzhe. Seeing as dawn was about to break, the bandit feared that Shaoqie would take out his anger on him, so he racked his brain to offer suggestions. He said, "Lure has plenty of followers. They are all his snoops and spies. Every time he heads out for battles, they will spread out all around him to facilitate the relaying of updates to Lei Jingzhe. Now that they are not here, it's most likely because they have gotten wind of it and fled. You have blocked off access to the south, and we don't dare to head north, so we can only retreat east. If you give chase now, you'll definitely be able to catch up to them." Although Tantai, who despised a spineless coward like him who would sell out his master for his own benefit, he still reported the information as it was to Shaoqie. Shaoqie considered it over for a moment on his horse before he said to Tantai, who, "Take half of your men and chase after them along the eastern side of the mountain forest. They are now birds that will be startled at the mere twang of a bowstring. Just intimidate them a little, and they will be in such panic that they won't be able to turn around and meet the attack head-on as usual. You just need to hit them hard. Those remaining 1,000 people are all scattered soldiers without contact with their commander. They won't be able to hold their own against you." Tantai, who acknowledged his orders, only to see Shaoqie gathering the remaining men. So he asked, "Since that's the case, wouldn't it do for Master to wait for me here? Why make another trip? Look at Lei Jingzhe's behavior and demeanor, and you should know that he's not only suspicious by nature but also terrified of death. Whatever we can think of, he can think of it too. If heading east is the only way for them to take, He will not go along with such a large contingent of troops. That is too big a target, it's too obvious. Shao Qia wound up his horsewhip and said, since he dared to use Lei Changming as a live target earlier, he will similarly dare to use these remaining 1,000 people as live targets as well. You may set your mind at ease and head east. I'll go block him. It was scorching hot these 2 days. The sun was so blazing that it made the bandits burning with anxiety even more restless and uneasy. They squatted in groups in the mountain forest. Seeing as Lei Jingzhe had been slow to show himself, they loudly questioned Luer, who was standing on a rock. Master Lu is also a part of the council, so you would be clearer than us when it comes to news of the second in command. What is the situation now? Tell us. Luer stuffed tobacco into his pipe, but did not manage to find a flint. He squatted on the rock and looked up at the clear, cloudless sky. It was too bright to take in everything at a glance. He clicked his tongue and said, I'm here to deliver a message, aren't I? That is, go home. The Imperial Army has captured a few hundred brothers under my command, and I still don't know if they are alive or dead now. I'm waiting for the second in command to come up with an idea to save them, and he's telling us to go home just like this? Isn't this just tucking our tails between our legs and subjecting ourselves to bullying? A man with a booming voice stood up and said with discontent, we were all big names back in Mount Luo, and we followed him to Tsizhou so that we would have no lack of food and water. In the end, we have all become cowards like tortoises hiding in their shells. This is really fucking pissing me off. Isn't this all because we are down on our luck? Luer not only looked like a shrewd old monkey, the way he handled matters was also similar. He had a lot to complain about regarding Lei Jingzhe's current order, but he would never voice it out, so he said in an attempt to smooth things over, even if you return to Mount Luo now, you will still be a big name there. Whom among us can take it lying down? But there will be times when even a horse will stumble. It's no big deal if we suffer from the occasional defeat. All you have to do is report the number of people you have lost to the council later and get the second in command to make it up to you, as well as allocate some silver to you. Surely he won't shortchange you. Do I look like I give a damn about that bit of silver? The man spat. I'm heartbroken for those brothers. Do you think people are that easily replaced nowadays? Didn't you see the public notice posted by the Imperial Army? Tsizhou wants to rebuild its garrison troop. There are meals and fields to be had. Why would anyone give up a decent job in a regular army and join us? They got a screw loose up there? Moreover, our numbers are much greater than the Imperial Army. We should have just fought them the first time we encountered them at the foot of Tsizhou's city gate. But he feared this and that. The fuck he's afraid of? This is just great. We haven't even met them head-on, and we have already inexplicably lost. Sounds of agreement rang out all around at his words. Creases formed at the corners of Luer's eyes. He said, the second in command is just being cautious. The Imperial Army is well equipped. Look at those armors that are so polished they shine. We might not necessarily be their match if we really come to blows. They just look impressive on the surface. The man wiped the phlegm he had spit out with the sole of his shoe and said, what kind of troops is the Imperial Army? How many battles have they fought? They can't fight for nuts. They only fought once with the 8 great training divisions at the gate of Zhongbua. Can that even be called a battle? That's called a pissing contest. Whoever the fuck stands the longest wins. Laughter broke out all around. The man noisily cleared his throat and tugged at his collar again to reveal a reddish chest. He said, as I see it, we are not in a hurry to leave. Tsizhou is such a big gold mine. If we miss it this time, it'll be harder to lay our hands on it the next time. The Imperial Army goes around posting notices everywhere to get the common folks to tip them off. But at the end of the day, they are still afraid, no? If not, then let them bring it on. We are now all gathered together, and we have at least 5,000 or 6,000 people. Just engaging in guerrilla warfare in the mountains alone will be enough to make the Imperial Army suffer. Luer did not kick up a stink with him or make a decision. He rubbed the pipe in his hand and said, "The second in command said to go back, and you still want to fight them. Then go notify him yourself. He wants to be a cowering tortoise and hide his head under his crotch. Where am I supposed to go looking for him?" The man sneered. "He doesn't even dare to show his face. Why? Afraid there's an imperial army spy among the brothers? Bah!" The man that Lei Jingzhe had used as a shield that day when he fled was none other than this man's prospective brother-in-law. His younger sister was just as burly as him, and she had been previously unable to find a suitable person to marry. It had not been easy to find a man who treated his younger sister well this time, and they were even ready to have the wedding at the year of the year. But who would have expected Lei Jingzhe to use him as a shield this trip? He hated Lei Jingzhe for being hard-hearted, and he also resented Lei Jingzhe for subjecting them to this kind of frustration they could only bottle up. "I'll repeat the second-in-command's words." Luer stood up and pounded at his waist with his pipe. He said, "We are now the vanguard squad. We don't have many people, but we are still different from those minor bandits we came across on the way. As long as we can get out of Tizhou's border within 5 days and arrive at Duanzhou's relay station, we can be considered to be back in our own territory. By then, we will have nothing to fear even if the Imperial Army wants to continue pursuing us." On seeing the fury on that man's face after he was done speaking, he continued, "Of course, the second-in-command is still hurrying on his way here. Whether we leave or stay is open to discussion." They were initially bandits gathered from various mountain strongholds. Although Lei Changming was usually a headstrong man, he was very generous to the brothers, showering them with meat and wine, money and women. Even if they made a mistake, they only had to plead for mercy for the matter to be dropped. But Lei Jingzhe was different. Not only did he rarely show himself, he was also rather severe in meting out punishment. 8 or 9 out of 10 wrongdoers who ended up in his hands would all meet their end. He relied on inspiring awe to lead these bandits. Those who feared him outnumbered those who respected him. Now that everyone had fallen into dire straits together, it was inevitable for them to start harboring other intentions. One could take turns to be the emperor, so why not the chief of the bandits? He who is capable is qualified. Seeing how Luer was a weathercock who did not want to offend both sides, the man said, "Fine, the second-in-command won't come, and he tells us to flee by ourselves. I'm of the view that he can be unrighteous, but we can't be unrighteous. The Imperial Army is still at Bianshui town, right? Luer, don't you fucking leave any traces behind. Let's take this place as our camping ground and carry out harassment in small group. We are used to climbing mountains. As long as the Imperial Army gathers manpower and turns around to fight us, we will run back. Forget it if they don't enter the mountain, but if they dare to pursue their way in, then we will take all of them down and not let anyone return alive. As long as he's human, he will not be able to hold out if we keep up with this war of attrition against him for a few days. When the time comes, we'll charge our way down in one burst of energy and beat the shit out of him. The city of Tizhou will still fall into our hands as long as the Imperial Army is afraid, no? So how about it? Do we do it or not?" The remaining people were all fired up by his words. They had been living like vermin detested by all these few days. Not only were they killed by the Imperial Army, they were also subjected to bullying by unarmed commoners. They could neither eat nor sleep well. Where had they ever had to endure this kind of hardship back in Mount Luo? So they promptly chimed in and shouted, "Do it! We'll follow Big Bro Ding's lead." Pleased, Ding Yo laughed out loud. He nodded in satisfaction and said, "We all have brothers who have been captured by the Imperial Army. This revenge must be taken. If Xiao Qia dares to kill one of our men, we'll kill 10 of his to give vent to this wrath of ours. Who knows, when the time comes for us to take him captive and occupy the city of Tizhou, maybe even Xiao Jiming will try to cozy up to us." The bandits were in high spirits, and for a moment, Everyone was talking all at once about the good life they would have after occupying the city of Tsizhou. Ding Niu was on cloud 9 after being praised, and he increasingly felt confident that this plan would work. He was already thinking about bringing his younger sister over and finding her a husband, one who had to be better than the one who died. But then he had a better idea. This Xiao Qia works fine too. He was not only impressive looking, he was also taller than him, had a great physique, and came from a good family background. At this point, Ding Niu was already thinking about children and grandchildren. But then he saw the disciple on sentry duty at the foot of the mountain scrambling his way over. The latter's face was pale with fright as he announced, "The Imperial Army is here." Luer slipped his way into the blades of grasses, wanting to flee. Ding Niu grabbed this wily old fart, lifted him, and demanded with a glare, "You tipped the Imperial Army off?" Luer hunched over, his long arms dangling, his white eyebrows almost trailing to the ground. He hurriedly shook his head and said, "Not me. How can it be me? I wouldn't have come if it were me." Ding Niu put Luer back on the ground. He steeled himself and said at the top of his voice, "Great! Since they have come calling at our door themselves, then we shall go and meet them." Lei Jingzhe spurred his horse on and galloped on the road. He had already skirted around the mountain forest at the east and was on his return trip back. More than half of the Imperial Army troops would be held up with Ding Niu, Luer, and the rest of the group as his cover, while the remaining had to stay behind to guard the southern side of Tsizhou, as well as the villages and towns along the way. He was the fish that had slipped through the net. Lei Jingzhe had only brought along the silly lad, Li Xiong. He did not want the rest of them. It was not because he trusted Li Xiong that he was willing to take him along, but because this lad was silly enough, and Lei Jingzhe had single-handedly brought him up all by himself. Li Xiong was the most obedient lad, and Lei Jingzhe could tell what he was thinking at a mere glance. Lei Jingzhe rode a horse, while Li Xiong ran on foot. He ran with great vigor and had no trouble keeping up as he followed behind Lei Jingzhe's horse. They had already been running all night, and Li Xiong was still naively waiting to meet up with the rest of them. "Take a drink of water." Lei Jingzhe tossed the water bag to Li Xiong as he reined in his horse. "We won't be resting en route today." Li Xiong opened the lid and gulped down more than half of it in one breath. On seeing this, Lei Jingzhe cursed. "You stupid brat! If you drink it all up now, then what are you going to drink at night? You're going to keep whining about wanting to pee later with this much water in your stomach." Li Xiong wiped his mouth with a smile and patted his stomach. He said, "I won't, bro. It'll be gone after a run." Lei Jingzhe hung the water bag back on the horse's back. He asked, "Are you hungry?" Li Xiong shook his head and said, "I stuffed myself so much last night that I'm still full. We'll be able to eat meat once we're back in Mount Luo." Thus, Lei Jingzhe did not linger further and continued hurrying on his way with Li Xiong in tow. They had helpers in Dunzhou, and the Dunzhou relay station could pass on his message to deploy the bandit soldiers who were still guarding Mount Luo. Lei Jingzhe was in such a hurry because he still had some misgivings. He wanted to arrive before news of Ding Niu, Luer, and the others' capture made its way back. Otherwise, should the news arrive first, half of the trust and reputation he had built up throughout the year in Mount Luo would fall into shambles. By then, it would not be as easy as it was now to deploy the men. The road checks along the way gradually grew lax until it was not as strict as it had been within 10 li or so around Bianshui town. The number of the Imperial Army troops grew fewer and fewer. By the time Lei Jingzhe passed by the vegetable fields manned by troops, he could no longer see any signs of the Imperial Army. At night, they rested by the side of a stream. Li Xiong speared a few fishes and roasted them for Lei Jingzhe to consume. Without seasonings or herbs, these fishes were fishy and bitter to the taste. But Li Xiong ate them with relish and fell on his back to sleep after eating his fill. Lei Jingzhe did not dare to leave the campfire behind, so he covered it with soil, gradually finding it harder to hang on as he had not had any sleep for a day and a night. He leaned against a tree and fell asleep. Lei Jingzhe slept for an unspecified amount of time before he was startled awake. He propped himself up on the ground, stilled his breathing, and listened to signs of activity within the forest with rapt attention. The wind was a little strong tonight. Tree branches swayed from the force of it, rustling the leaves in intermittent bursts. Li Xiong was still sleeping, his snores thunderous. Lei Jingzhe listened for a long time. Although he could not see anything amiss, he was already starting to feel suspicious. He kicked Li Xiong awake and gestured with his hands for Li Xiong to get the horse. As Li Xiong untied the reins, he suddenly had the urge to relieve himself. He never stopped for a break in the morning, and he had fallen right asleep at night. Unable to hold it in, he whispered to Lei Jingzhe, "Bro, I want to pee." Lei Jingzhe clicked his tongue and made a gesture as if he was going to thrash him, then motioned for him to hurry. So Li Xiong went behind the tree and loosened his waist sash. The sound of water splashing rang out. Having seen no signs of movement so far, Lei Jingzhe relaxed a little. He pulled the horse, and when the horse snorted, he suddenly realized something off. Why was there not even a chirp from the birds or insects? Li Xiong was not done relieving himself when he heard Lei Jingzhe hiss. "Leave!" Li Xiong exclaimed in acknowledgement, then tied his waist sash in a hurry and broke into a run after him. Lei Jingzhe lashed out hard with his horsewhip and charged at random among the shadows of the trees. The tree forks swaying in the wind loomed like demons brandishing their claws and baring their fangs as they came surrounding him from all sides. Lei Jingzhe fled until he was sweating. He did not know why he was sweating. His back had gone all cold from the wind. He did not even care to look back at Li Xiong. He only wanted to leave this forest as fast as possible. The horse under him was already exhausted from the running. No matter how he whipped it, it did not run as fast as it did in the daytime. The sounds of footsteps came trampling noisily towards him. It was as if Lei Jingzhe was being chased by some gargantuan behemoth. He crashed headlong through the net of trees and charged out of the forest, but following right after, he forcibly reined in the horse and gasped for breath as he looked fixedly ahead. The hem of Xiao Qia's clothes fluttered backward in the wind. The gerfalcon was perched on his shoulder, its head tilted to the side. Darkness seemed to spread out from behind him. It weighed down heavily on Lei Jingzhe's limbs, swallowing them and rendering him immobile. His entire body was frozen stiff on the back of the horse. A raspy sound escaped from Lei Jingzhe's throat. He snapped back to his senses and thought of turning around, but the Imperial army was all around him. Xiao Qia had deliberately hidden his men in the forest. As a result, Lei Jingzhe could not guess how many men he had brought along. This was a counterblow to Lei Jingzhe's initial deception, so that Lei Jingzhe would similarly experience the absurdity of being played. "Go ahead and run," Xiao Qia said in a deep voice. Lei Jingzhe released the reins and put both hands up. He said, "You win. I concede defeat." Lang Tao Shuijin threw its head back and neighed. Xiao Qia said nothing. Lei Jingzhe slid off his horse slowly, keeping both hands up to indicate that he had no thoughts of fighting it out to the death. He seemed to be very well aware of the situation. After landing on the ground, he removed the broadsword at the side of his waist and looked at Xiao Qia as he bent over to put it on the ground. Then he said, "We can still talk." His interest piqued, Xiao Qia said, "Go on." Lei Jingzhe calmed his panting. Surrounded by the cold glints of blades, and with beads of sweat dripping from his temples, he said, "You're going back to Libei, so you won't reside in Xizhou for long. Killing me now won't stop the Mount Luo bandits from making a comeback. Instead, it will plunge Dunzhou and Duanzhou, which have only just stabilized, back into chaos. Why not let me go to keep the situation in both prefectures stable and give Xizhou enough time to rebuild its garrison troops?" The cawing of a crow rang out from the sky. Meng braced itself. With a spread of its wings, it took to the air, glided through the wind, and swooped into the billowing trees. The atmosphere at the bottom subsequently grew tense. Lei Jingzhe kept looking at Xiao Qie all this while, as if to prove that he was confident of success, that it was not the end of the road for him yet. Xiao Qie lifted a hand and laid his palm at the side of his waist. Both men stood facing each other. In the very instant Meng pounced and ripped into the crow, Lei Jingzhe abruptly kicked up his broadsword and flung off its sheath. He rolled forward. With a strong burst of strength in his legs, he sprang up high into the air and cleaved the broadsword down towards Xiao Qie right in the face. Blade collided violently against blade, sending sparks sputtering as they scraped against each other in a mighty show of power. The scorching weather that had persisted for several days dissipated in the wind. Skies that were still clear and boundless in the morning were now overcast with dark clouds. A few bean-sized raindrops came pelting down, followed by the sudden arrival of a rainstorm, as if heaven could not bear the heat and had sent it to scour the filthy world. Li Xiong, who had lost track of Lei Jingzhe, circled around for a long time before he finally heard the subtle sounds of fighting in the rain. He brushed aside the branches and leaves with all his might and trampled upon muddied water as he chased his way towards the sound. The moment he rolled out, he came right in front of the Imperial army wielding their blades. He was unarmed, but in a moment of desperation when he saw Lei Jingzhe in a disadvantageous position under the curtain of rain, he bellowed and turned around to wrap his arms around a bare, withered tree as thick as the rim of a bowl and swung it up. Bro! Like a strong, charging bull of limitless strength, Li Xiong sent the Imperial army on one side scattering all over in total disarray. Xiao Qie did not expect Li Xiong to have such strength. He swung away from the trajectory of the tree Li Xiong was brandishing. Lei Jingzhe, who had already been struck with the blade, saw his opportunity and retreated immediately to Li Xiong's side. Li Xiong's extraordinary strength was innate, and it was even more terrifying than Xiao Qie's. He swung the tree to ward off all those blades and swords and shouted, "Bro, I'll carry you on my back." Lei Jingzhe jumped onto Li Xiong's back. Supporting the tree, Li Xiong bellowed and charged a path out of the encirclement. He was not afraid of blades and swords, and he did not fear Xiao Qie either. Newborn calves were all of such a temperament, there was only his big brother Lei Jingzhe in his eyes. Li Xiong did not even feel the pain when he was slashed in the arms. He kicked over the wall of people before him and broke into a mad dash in the torrential rain with Lei Jingzhe on his back. Blood dripped off Lei Jingzhe, staining Li Xiong's back red. Li Xiong wiped his face and cried, "Bro, don't die." Lei Jingzhe was not a person who would simply resign to his fate. He did not have a pleasant time back in the Zhu clan in Duanzhou. His father failed his mother, so he changed his surname and called himself Lei Jingzhe from then on. He ran into danger many times on Mount Luo, and he had always been able to wait for things to take a turn for the better. But Xiao Qie was just like the sudden rain that came out of nowhere this night. He was the edge of a precipice he had never foreseen. He thought it should not be the end of him just yet he could only watch as the turns of events tipped the balance against him. "Damn it!" Covering his wound, Lei Jingzhe said, "Shut up!" Li Xiong listened to the sound of horse hooves behind him and dashed off with his teeth clenched and his face tilted up. This lad was truly unusual, even ordinary horses could not catch up to him. But Xiao Qie's Lang Tao Xuejin was extraordinary. In the blink of an eye, it had already caught up right behind them. Li Xiong did his best, but as he leaped across the stream, he suddenly cramped up. He was still growing, and he lost his balance when he landed on his feet. Consequently, he fell. As he sucked in a breath from the pain, he dragged Lei Jingzhe up, still intending to carry him on his back to flee. "Xiao Qie." Knowing that there was no escape for him, Lei Jingzhe said, "If you are willing to spare me, then it's possible for the bandits of Mount Luo to come under your command. I still have some influence left. I can still be of some use." Xiao Qie flung away the drops of blood on Longli blade. Lang Tao Xuejin stamped its hooves twice before it broke into a sudden run. Lei Jingzhe twisted Li Xiong's face over. There was already a change in the timbre of his voice amidst his violent gasp. He did not want to die. His grip tightened on Li Xiong's hand as he said, "Xiongzai, one kill him, kill him." Li Xiong rubbed away the rainwater on his face. With one limping leg, he spread both arms open and stabilized his lower body, wanting to throw off Lang Tao Xuejin. With his sturdy body trembling, he looked at Xiao Qia, then let loose a bellow and charged over. He wrapped his arms around Lang Tao Xuejin's neck, causing Lang Tao Xuejin to neigh. He did not know too many martial art moves, but there was a flash of his leg in what was clearly a wrestling technique of the Bianxia tribes as he flung Lang Tao Xuejin over into the muddy water. Xiao Qia grabbed Li Xiong, who had a youthful-looking face, up by the collar. As the latter struggled and pounded on Xiao Qia's arms, he shouted, "Bro, run!" Hauling Li Xiong along, Xiao Qia watched as Lei Jingzhe rolled down the muddy slope. He did not give chase. Li Xiong made to bite him with his teeth, and Xiao Qia wrung his back collar to hurl him right to the ground face first, so that his nose and mouth were stuffed into the mud puddle, choking him until he was violently struggling all over. "Tie him up," Li Xiong heard Xiao Qia say to the Imperial Army, who had arrived later. And then he was knocked unconscious with the back of a blade. The rainstorm stopped after a while. Tantai, who arrived from behind on horseback. Xiao Qia just happened to be wiping the mud off Lang Tao Xuejin's body. When he saw Tantai Hu, he removed the half-arm fabric sleeve used for wiping with one hand and beckoned to Tantai Hu. "Master," Tantai Hu said, "I'll lead the men to outflank him from the southeastern side right away. He won't be able to run far." But Xiao Qia asked him, "Have all the bandits in the forest been captured?" Tantai Hu thought that Xiao Qia wanted to do a head count and was ready to turn back to get his subordinate to bring over the book. But unexpectedly, Xiao Qia said as he wiped away the mud on his fingers, "It's all good as long as you've caught them. There's no need to show me. Go get ready. We're returning to the city." Tantai Hu was taken aback. Seeing that Xiao Qia had already picked up the saddle to put it on Lang Tao Xuejin, he walked a few steps with him and said, "Master, isn't letting him go just like this akin to letting the tiger return to the mountains and setting the stage for future disasters?" As Xiao Qia wiped the mud on the saddle, he said, "I'm not only going to let him go, I'm going to send him off with great fanfare. Get a few squads of men to follow him. He has been stabbed. Don't let him die on the way. Send him all the way into Duanzhou's territory. There's no need to bother about the other matters." Tantai Hu only had to use his brain a little to understand his intent. He grinned and said, "Then I'll go. Master, I'll bring dozens of men. I'll be sure to escort him back to Dunzhou within 3 days." Xiao Qia looked on with cool detachment in the direction where Lei Jingzhe had fled. A dripping wet meng landed back on his shoulder and combed through its blood-stained feathers. Xiao Qia used the handkerchief that he had used to wipe the mud from Lang Tao Xuejin to clean Meng's talons. He said, "Lift it properly. I'll wipe them clean for you. Otherwise, if you see Lanzhao upon returning and trample mud all over his shoulders, I'll have to wash his robe."